What if the neat and tidy timeline of events you memorized in school was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion? Beneath the polished surface of our history books lie whispers of other possibilities, stories that challenge the official narrative and suggest that the past might be far more mysterious than we've been led to believe. For centuries, what we accept as fact has been curated by the winners, by governments and institutions with their own agendas, leaving us to wonder if the truth was ever meant to be found. Today, we are going to become detectives of the distant past, peeling back the layers of time to question the very foundations of our shared history. This journey isn't about accepting wild speculation, but about confronting the unsettling gaps and anomalies that even the most respected scholars struggle to explain. The term historical conspiracy often brings to mind images of shadowy figures and elaborate secrets, but at its heart, it represents a fundamental human impulse, the need to question, to look deeper, and to refuse to accept a simple answer when the evidence points toward something more complex. We are drawn to these enigmas not because we want to believe in fantasy, but because we sense that the full story has not been told. From the unexplained disappearance of entire civilizations to the suspicious circumstances surrounding the deaths of iconic leaders, these are the puzzles that refuse to be solved, the loose threads that, when pulled, threaten to unravel our entire understanding of who we are and how we got here. This compelling tension between the official record and the tantalizing evidence that contradicts it is where true historical mystery lies. So, prepare to venture into the shadowy corners of the past as we explore 30 historical conspiracies that might just be true. We will examine theories that have been dismissed by mainstream history, yet are supported by compelling clues, puzzling artifacts, and testimony that simply cannot be easily ignored. Our investigation will take us from the ancient world to the corridors of modern power, questioning events you thought you knew inside and out. This is not about presenting definitive answers, but about opening a door to possibility, inviting you to look at history with a fresh and critical eye. The journey we are about to begin promises to challenge your perceptions and ignite a sense of wonder about the hidden stories woven into the fabric of our world. Our journey into history's hidden corners begins not in a dusty European archive, but on the windswept plains of ancient China, with a mystery that spans continents and empires. In the year 53 BC, one of the most powerful military forces the world has ever known, the Roman Republic, suffered a catastrophic defeat. At the Battle of Carrhae, a vast army led by the ambitious general Marcus Licinius Crassus was decimated by the Parthian Empire. While Crassus himself was killed, historical accounts suggest that tens of thousands of Roman soldiers were captured and marched east into the heart of Central Asia, vanishing from the official record. But what if they didn't simply disappear? What if their story had a second, unexpected chapter written thousands of miles from home? This is the core of a theory that connects the fate of a lost Roman legion to a remote village in western China. The trail begins with a tantalizing reference in ancient Chinese chronicles from the Han Dynasty. Around 36 BC, a Chinese general named Chen Tang reported encountering a strange enemy force while battling a nomadic tribe. He described their unique defensive formation, a strategy where soldiers locked their shields together in an overlapping pattern, creating a protective shell, a tactic that bears a striking resemblance to the Roman testudo, or tortoise formation, a signature maneuver of Roman legions that was virtually unknown in the East. This account alone is enough to make historians take notice, suggesting the presence of military minds trained in distinctly Roman warfare. The plot thickens further when we arrive at the small village of Liqian, located in the Gansu province of China. For generations, the residents of this area have stood out from their neighbors. Many possess features that are uncommon among the local Han Chinese population: light-colored or green eyes, blonde or light brown hair, and even taller statures. These physical traits have fueled local legends of distant foreign ancestors. In the early 2000s, this folklore attracted the attention of scientists who conducted DNA testing on the villagers. The results were intriguing, though not entirely conclusive. Some studies indicated a mixture of European and Central Asian genetic markers, which could be consistent with the lineage of Roman mercenaries who traveled along the Silk Road. While the genetic evidence doesn't definitively prove a direct link to a specific Roman legion, it certainly adds a powerful layer of circumstantial evidence to the mystery. The debate among scholars is, as you might expect, fierce and fascinating. Skeptics argue that the genetic markers could have come from any number of other ancient travelers, such as traders from the Byzantine Empire or soldiers from the armies of Alexander the Great, who also pushed into Central Asia. They caution that the Chinese text describing the shield formation could be a later misinterpretation or a coincidental tactical innovation. Yet, proponents of the theory counter with the compelling convergence of evidence. The timing of the legion's disappearance aligns with the appearance of these foreign soldiers in Chinese records. The unique military tactic is highly specific, and the persistent physical traits in Liquian provide a living, breathing clue. It's a historical puzzle where no single piece offers absolute proof, but together they form a picture that is difficult to ignore. The story of the Lost Legion challenges our assumptions about the interconnectedness of the ancient world, suggesting that the reach of Rome may have extended much further east than our history books have ever acknowledged. From the sprawling mysteries of the ancient world, we now turn to a chilling drama played out within the cold stone walls of an English fortress, a tale of power, betrayal, and the haunting disappearance of two children that has gripped the public imagination for over 5 centuries. In the year 1483, England was a kingdom on a knife's edge. The Wars of the Roses, a brutal decades-long struggle for the throne between the houses of York and Lancaster, had seemingly ended with the Yorkist king Edward IV securely in power. But when Edward died unexpectedly in April of that year, the political stability of the nation evaporated overnight. The crown passed to his 12-year-old son, who was set to become King Edward V. However, the boy and his younger brother, 9-year-old Richard, Duke of York, were never crowned. Instead, they were placed in the Tower of London, ostensibly for their own protection ahead of the coronation, and then they simply vanished from history. The traditional narrative, immortalized by William Shakespeare and long supported by Tudor historians, points an unwavering finger of guilt at the boy's uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. As Lord Protector, Richard was tasked with guiding the young king, but he swiftly moved to seize power for himself. He declared his brother's marriage to the boy's mother invalid, rendering the princes illegitimate and thus ineligible for the throne. With this bold stroke, Richard had the path cleared for his own coronation as King Richard III. The prince's now inconvenient obstacles were last seen playing within the Tower grounds before they disappeared from public view. The conclusion seemed inevitable. Richard, the power-hungry usurper, had ordered the murder of his own nephews to secure his grip on the crown. It is a story of monstrous ambition that has defined Richard's legacy for generations. But what if this classic tale of villainy is itself a masterpiece of historical deception? What if Richard III was not the perpetrator, but a victim of a brilliant and enduring smear campaign? This is the conspiracy that challenges everything we think we know about one of history's most infamous crimes. The case against Richard is almost entirely circumstantial. There is no surviving direct evidence from the time that proves he gave the order. This absence of proof has allowed historians and sleuths to propose compelling alternative suspects who had just as much, if not more, to gain from the prince's deaths. One prime candidate is Henry Stafford, the Duke of Buckingham. Initially one of Richard's strongest allies, Buckingham suddenly turned against him and led a failed rebellion later in 1483. Could his rebellion have been fueled by a guilty conscience or a strategic attempt to distance himself from a crime he himself orchestrated? As the Constable of England, he had direct control over the Tower and its prisoners, placing him in the perfect position to arrange the murders without Richard's knowledge. An even more compelling suspect is the man who ultimately defeated Richard at the Battle of Bosworth Field 2 years later, Henry Tudor, who became King Henry VII. Henry's claim to the throne was weak, based largely on conquest. The continued existence of the Yorkist princes, even as illegitimate heirs, posed a permanent and potent threat to his reign. They were living symbols of a rival dynasty who could become focal points for rebellion. By having them killed, Henry would have eliminated his most dangerous rivals. Crucially, after taking the throne, Henry never produced the princes alive to prove his legitimacy, nor did he ever publicly accuse Richard of their murder until years later. In fact, he passed an Act of Parliament that carefully avoided naming Richard as the killer, a strange omission if he was so certain of his predecessor's guilt. This has led some to speculate that Henry was covering his own tracks, creating a narrative that would forever tarnish the reputation of the Yorkist king he had overthrown. The mystery took a dramatic turn in the year 1674, when workmen remodeling a staircase within the tower made a grim discovery: a wooden chest containing the skeletons of 2 children. The sizes were consistent with the ages of the missing princes. King Charles II, convinced they were the remains of the boys, ordered them interred in a marble urn in Westminster Abbey, where they still lie today. While later examinations confirmed the bones were of children from the correct period, definitive proof of their identity remains elusive. The controversy continues to rage, a testament to the fact that this is not merely an academic debate. It is a human story about the fate of 2 innocent boys, used as pawns in a deadly game of power. The question of who gave the order for their deaths forces us to confront the ruthless nature of medieval politics and the powerful incentive that the winners of history have to shape the narrative to their own advantage, casting their enemies as monsters while their own secrets are buried by time. Moving from the shadowy intrigues of medieval England, we now set sail for a mystery etched on parchment, a puzzle that suggests the annals of ancient exploration may be far more extraordinary than we ever imagined. In the year 1513, an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis compiled a world map that would one day baffle historians and geographers. Drawing upon a multitude of source charts, including some he claimed were captured from Christopher Columbus, Reis created a detailed depiction of the known world. For centuries, the map resided in relative obscurity, but when it was rediscovered in the 1900s, scholars noticed something truly extraordinary. Along the bottom edge of the map, below the coast of South America, lay a landmass with a curiously accurate, deeply indented coastline. To many researchers, this land bears a startling resemblance to the continent of Antarctica, but with one impossible detail. It appears to be shown free of its massive ice sheet, a condition that, according to mainstream science, has not existed for millions of years. This is the heart of the Piri Reis Map anomaly, a conspiracy that posits the existence of a highly advanced pre-classical civilization capable of global seafaring and sophisticated cartography. Proponents of this theory argue that the map's accuracy is not a coincidence. They point to the meticulous way the coastlines of South America and Africa are rendered, suggesting a level of geographical knowledge that should not have been possible for European or Ottoman explorers in the early 16th century. The most compelling and controversial claim is that the map accurately depicts the Queen Maud Land region of Antarctica, matching subglacial topography that was only mapped in the 20th century using modern seismic technology. This leads to a breathtaking conclusion that the map must be based on far older source materials created by an unknown culture that explored the Earth in a distant era when Antarctica was not frozen over. The most famous champion of this idea was historian Charles Hapgood. In the 1960s, Hapgood developed a radical theory to explain how such a map could exist. He proposed a process called crustal displacement, a catastrophic shift of the Earth's entire outer crust. According to Hapgood, this event could have rapidly moved Antarctica from a more temperate latitude into its current polar position thousands of years ago, explaining how it could have been mapped while still ice-free. He argued that a sophisticated civilization, perhaps the legendary Atlantis, had achieved this feat of global exploration, and their knowledge was preserved in fragmentary maps that were passed down and eventually incorporated by cartographers like Piri Reis. This theory, while fringe, gained a surprising supporter in none other than Albert Einstein, who wrote a foreword to one of Hapgood's books, acknowledging that the idea of crustal displacement was worthy of serious consideration. Mainstream cartography and geology, however, offer a very different set of explanations, grounded in a more conventional view of history. Skeptics argue that the resemblance to Antarctica is highly speculative. They suggest the landmass on the Piri Reis map is far more likely a distorted, composite representation of the southern coast of South America, perhaps blended with mythical lands or islands reported by early explorers. The concept of a terra australis, a vast southern continent, was a common feature on maps of this period, based on philosophical belief as much as on exploration. Cartographers often filled blank spaces on their maps with speculative geography. Furthermore, experts point out that Piri Reis himself wrote notes on the map explaining his sources, which included Portuguese charts of newly discovered lands and ancient maps from the time of Alexander the Great. The accuracy of the South American coast, they contend, can be attributed to these now lost Portuguese maps, not to an impossibly ancient global survey. The debate ultimately hinges on interpretation. Is the Piri Reis map a miraculous window into a lost chapter of human history, evidence of a seafaring culture whose achievements were wiped clean by time? Or is it a fascinating but ultimately conventional product of its era, a brilliant synthesis of available knowledge that we misinterpret through a modern lens? The map refuses to yield a simple answer, serving instead as a powerful reminder of how much of the past remains unknown. It challenges our linear progression of history, suggesting that the journey of human discovery might be a cyclical one, with ages of knowledge rising and falling, leaving behind only cryptic clues like this enigmatic chart for future generations to ponder. While the maps of Piri Reis speak to possible lost knowledge, our next mystery presents a phenomenon that seems to defy knowledge itself, an event where history records not a hidden truth, but a public display of pure, inexplicable madness. In the summer of 1518, the city of Strasbourg, then part of the Holy Roman Empire, became the stage for one of the most bizarre and horrifying episodes ever documented. It began quietly enough with a single woman, Frau Trophia, stepping into the street and beginning to dance. This was not a joyful celebration, but a frantic, compulsive movement that she seemed powerless to stop. She danced for days without rest or music, her feet bleeding, her body pushed to the brink of collapse. Within a week, the solitary dancer was joined by dozens more, and soon the number swelled to over 400 citizens, all caught in the same uncontrollable frenzy. For weeks, the dancing plague raged. The city's authorities, desperate for a solution, initially believed the afflicted needed to dance it out. They even hired musicians and built wooden stages to encourage the behavior, a decision that tragically only fueled the epidemic. The dancers, trapped in their own bodies, succumbed to heart attacks, strokes, and sheer exhaustion. By the time the plague subsided, dozens had died from a compulsion that remains a profound medical and historical enigma. The conventional explanation offered by modern historians and psychologists is a phenomenon known as mass psychogenic illness or collective hysteria. This theory suggests that the dancing plague was not a physical disease but a psychological one, spread through the power of suggestion and amplified by extreme social stress. Strasbourg in 1518 was a city under immense pressure. The region had been suffering from severe famine thanks to a series of failed harvests. Widespread disease was common, and the populace lived in a state of deep poverty and superstition. In such a climate of fear and desperation, the mind can play powerful tricks. The sight of one person exhibiting strange behavior, perhaps as a response to their own trauma, could have acted as a psychological trigger for others, creating a feedback loop of shared delusion. The community's existing beliefs also played a role. There was a strong local reverence for Saint Vitus, a saint who was both invoked by dancers for protection and believed to curse people with a dancing mania. In this context, the dancing plague can be seen as a catastrophic social breakdown, a physical manifestation of the collective psyche pushed beyond its limits. Yet, this psychological explanation, while compelling, leaves certain questions unanswered. The duration and sheer physical intensity of the affliction seem extreme for a purely psychosomatic event. This ambiguity has given rise to a more sinister theory that the citizens of Strasbourg were not hysterical but poisoned. The prime suspect in this conspiratorial angle is a tiny but powerful natural organism, ergot fungus. This fungus, which grows on damp rye, the staple grain of the European peasant diet, is a known precursor to LSD. When ingested, ergot can cause a terrifying array of symptoms known as ergotism, or in the Middle Ages, St. Anthony's fire. The effects include violent muscle spasms and convulsions that could easily be misinterpreted as frantic dancing, along with vivid hallucinations, sensations of burning skin, and gangrene. There are documented historical outbreaks of ergot poisoning that resulted in mass convulsions, making it a plausible physical cause for the strange behavior. This leads to the deeper, more unsettling layer of the conspiracy. If ergot was the culprit, was its presence a simple accident of nature, or could it have been something more deliberate? The conditions for ergot growth, a cold winter followed by a wet, humid summer, were present in Strasbourg that year, supporting the natural occurrence theory. However, the concentrated and explosive nature of the outbreak has prompted speculation about human intervention. Could a contaminated batch of rye have been distributed, either through negligence or with malicious intent? In an era of political and religious turmoil, some theorists suggest the dancing plague might have been a form of early biological warfare, a failed attempt to destabilize the city by a rival faction. Alternatively, it might have been a disastrous experiment, perhaps by an alchemist or an early physician attempting to create a medicine or potion with unpredictable and horrific consequences. The official records, of course, mention no such plot, but the very silence of the historical documents leaves room for these darker possibilities. The tragedy of the Strasbourg dancing plague ultimately stands as a haunting reminder of the mysteries that lie at the intersection of mind, body, and environment. Whether it was a catastrophic case of social contagion, a mass poisoning by a mind-altering fungus, or even the result of a shadowy plot lost to time, the event forces us to confront the fragility of human control. It reveals how quickly societal order can dissolve, whether under the weight of collective stress or the influence of a microscopic poison. The image of hundreds of people dancing themselves to death is not just a strange historical footnote. It is a powerful symbol of the unknown forces that can, without warning, seize a community and rewrite its destiny in a most terrifying and inexplicable way. From the chaotic streets of Strasbourg, we journey into a mystery crafted not from compulsion or poison, but from pure, breathtaking opulence, a treasure so magnificent its loss has become a legend in itself. Known as the eighth wonder of the world, the Amber Room was an unparalleled masterpiece of Baroque art. Originally installed in the Charlottenburg Palace in Prussia, it was later gifted to Tsar Peter the Great in 1716, eventually finding its permanent home in the Catherine Palace near St. Petersburg. The room was not merely decorated with amber, it was a chamber entirely paneled in over 6 tons of the fossilized resin, meticulously carved and inlaid with gold leaf and intricate mirrors. When illuminated by hundreds of candles, the walls would glow with a warm, translucent light, creating an atmosphere of almost magical grandeur. It was a symbol of royal wealth and artistic collaboration, a treasure considered priceless not just for its materials but for its sheer artistic achievement. This extraordinary creation would become one of the most tragic casualties of the Second World War. As Nazi forces advanced deep into the Soviet Union in 1941, curators at the Catherine Palace made a desperate attempt to save the room. Knowing the amber panels were too fragile to dismantle quickly, they tried to conceal them behind wallpaper. The ruse was futile. Soldiers of Army Group North discovered the treasure, and under the direct orders of the Nazi looting organization known as the Einsatzstab Rosenberg, the entire room was carefully crated up and shipped to Königsberg Castle in East Prussia, then part of Germany. There, it was put on display for a brief period, but as the war turned against the Nazis and Königsberg came under relentless Allied bombing and a final assault by the Soviet Red Army in 1945, the Amber Room vanished from history. The official conclusion, supported by many historians, is that the room was destroyed in the intense fires that consumed the castle, its fragile amber panels melting into nothingness. Yet, the sheer value and legendary status of the Amber Room have made its complete destruction difficult for many to accept, giving rise to a persistent conspiracy that it was secretly saved. The theory posits that, anticipating the fall of Königsberg, Nazi officials ordered the room disassembled and hidden to prevent it from falling into Soviet hands or being destroyed in the bombardment. This has launched one of the greatest treasure hunts of the 20th century, with leads spanning continents. One of the most prominent theories suggests the crates were loaded onto a ship, the Wilhelm Gustloff, which was tragically sunk by a Soviet submarine in the Baltic Sea with immense loss of life. If the room was aboard, it would now lie at the bottom of the sea, preserved in the cold, dark waters. Another compelling lead points to a complex network of tunnels and mines in the Ore Mountains on the German-Czech border. Locals have long whispered about convoys of trucks arriving in the final days of the war, unloading mysterious cargo into hidden subterranean chambers that were then deliberately sealed. The mystery is further fueled by tantalizing fragments that have surfaced over the decades, each one reigniting hope that the main treasure still exists. In 1997, a single amber inlaid mosaic from the original room was discovered in the possession of a German soldier's family, leading to a massive but ultimately fruitless search. More recently, Polish divers exploring the wreck of the SS Karlsruhe, a German steamer that sank in 1945, claimed to have found chests containing military equipment and what they believe could be the lost amber panels. While these discoveries are provocative, they have yet to yield definitive proof. The possibility also exists that the room or parts of it survive in the secret vault of a private collector, a trophy looted by a high-ranking Nazi officer and kept hidden for generations. This theory paints a picture of a treasure hoarded in silence, its existence known only to a select few. The enduring quest for the Amber Room is about more than just recovering lost wealth. It is a pursuit driven by the desire to restore a severed link to a pre-war world of artistry and cultural exchange. The idea that such beauty could be entirely erased by the horrors of war is a painful one. The conspiracy that it still exists, hidden somewhere waiting to be found, offers a narrative of hope and redemption against the backdrop of 20th century destruction. Every new lead, whether it points to a sunken ship, a forgotten mine, or a private collection, keeps the legend alive. It challenges the official story of destruction, suggesting that perhaps the greatest treasures are not always lost, but merely waiting in the shadows for the right moment to be brought back into the light. He is the most famous writer in the English language, a global icon whose phrases and characters are woven into the very fabric of our culture. The name William Shakespeare is synonymous with literary genius. But what if the man from Stratford-upon-Avon was not the author of the works that bear his name? This is not a question of mere academic nitpicking. It is a full-blown conspiracy that strikes at the heart of our cultural heritage, suggesting that the greatest literary legacy in history might be built upon a centuries-old case of mistaken identity. The central problem, often called the Stratfordian paradox, is this: how could the son of a glovemaker who left behind no personal letters, no library, and no record of formal education produce a body of work that demonstrates an intimate, almost first-hand knowledge of law, medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and the intricate etiquette of royal courts? The plays are filled with detailed descriptions of Italy, yet there is no evidence the man from Stratford ever traveled outside of England. It is this jarring disconnect between the biography of the documented man and the breathtaking scope of the writing that has fueled skepticism for over 200 years. Enter the prime candidates in history's greatest literary whodunit. Among the most prominent is Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. Proponents of this theory argue that de Vere is the perfect fit. He was a nobleman, a courtier, and a poet who traveled extensively in Italy, visiting many of the exact cities featured in the plays like Venice and Verona. His life is filled with dramatic events that seem to parallel the plots. He was involved in a shipwreck similar to the one in The Tempest, and his family dynamics bear a striking resemblance to the story of Hamlet. Most importantly, as an aristocrat, writing plays for public performance would have been considered beneath his station. The conspiracy posits that he used the actor and businessman William Shakespeare as a front, a willing proxy to shield his own identity while his works were performed on stage. When de Vere died in 1604, several of the major plays, including King Lear, Macbeth, and The Tempest, had not yet been published. Advocates suggest these were written earlier and released posthumously by his supporters, explaining the gap. The evidence put forward goes beyond mere biographical parallels. Those who doubt the traditional story point to the strange circumstances surrounding the First Folio, the collected edition of Shakespeare's plays published in 1623. They highlight the dedicatory poems and the famous portrait on the frontispiece, which some argue depicts a generic mask or a costume, not a real person, with the cryptic motto, "Spear we shake." More compelling are the claims of ciphers and hidden signatures within the texts themselves. For centuries, researchers have scoured the plays and sonnets for acrostics, anagrams, and coded messages that they believe point to the true author. One famous example is the word honorificabilitudinitatibus from Love's Labours Lost, which anagrammatizers have rearranged to form Latin phrases hinting at de Vere's authorship. While mainstream scholars dismiss these as coincidental wordplay, for conspiracy theorists, they are deliberate clues left behind for the discerning reader. Of course, the traditional defense of William Shakespeare of Stratford is robust and deeply rooted. Academic scholars, often called Stratfordians, argue that the doubts are fundamentally a form of snobbery, an unwillingness to accept that a man of humble origins could possess such immense talent and autodidactic genius. They point to evidence of his life as a shareholder in the Lord Chamberlain's men acting troupe and the Globe Theatre, demonstrating his deep immersion in the theatrical world. The absence of personal papers, they contend, is not unusual for the time, especially for someone whose primary legacy was meant for the stage, not the page. As for the specialized knowledge in the plays, they argue that Elizabethan England was a vibrant center of learning and debate, and a brilliant, observant writer could have easily acquired such information through reading, conversation, and a sharp intellect. The publication of the First Folio by his fellow actors, John Hemming and Henry Condell, who knew him personally, is presented as the most powerful testimony to his authorship. This debate is far more than a scholarly argument, it is a cultural mirror. The Shakespeare authorship question forces us to confront our own assumptions about genius, class, and identity. Do we find it easier to believe in a singular, miraculous talent from an ordinary background? or does the narrative of a hidden, aristocratic author better satisfy our sense of how the world works? The Conspiracy offers a tantalizing alternative history, a secret drama played out behind the curtain of the Elizabethan stage. Whether you are a staunch Stratfordian or find the case for Edward de Vere compelling, the mystery endures because it keeps the works alive in a new way. It invites us to read not just for the story on the page, but for the ghostly presence of the author who may, or may not, be William Shakespeare. We now travel from the literary shadows of Elizabethan England to the sun-drenched absolutism of 17th century France, to a mystery that has become the very definition of a state secret. For over 3 decades, a single prisoner was held in the French penal system under the most extraordinary conditions. His identity was protected by an unparalleled order of secrecy. He was transported between prisons under heavy guard, forbidden from speaking to anyone, and his face was perpetually hidden behind a mask. While legend and Holly would have immortalized him as the man in the Iron Mask, historical records, including the meticulous journals of the Bastille's governor, describe a far more practical yet equally eerie contraption, a mask made of black velvet. This detail makes the story more plausible and in some ways more terrifying. The velvet suggests a long-term solution, a permanent erasure of identity designed not for torture but for absolute anonymity. The French state was not just imprisoning a man, it was vanishing him from history while keeping his body alive. The official list of suspects compiled by historians over the years reads like a who's who of Louis XIV's enemies, yet each candidate seems to have a flaw that keeps the mystery alive. One popular theory identifies the prisoner as Eustache Dorger, a valet who was arrested on the orders of the king's powerful minister, Nicolas Fouquet. The suggestion is that Dorger may have been privy to sensitive political secrets that could not be risked being spoken aloud, even in a dungeon. Another candidate is General Vivian de Bouillon, who was notoriously imprisoned for cowardice after abandoning a siege during the 9 Years' War. A coded letter from a military commander references a prisoner who must be masked, and the offense certainly warranted royal disgrace. Perhaps the most straightforward theory points to a failed assassin. An Italian adventurer named Ercole Mattioli was imprisoned around the right time for double-crossing the French king during a secret treaty negotiation. His betrayal was a serious diplomatic embarrassment, and silencing him would have been a clear priority for the Sun King's regime. Yet for each of these plausible explanations there is a counter-argument. If the prisoner was a mere valet or a disgraced soldier, why the unprecedented level of secrecy that extended for 34 years, overseen by only the most trusted jailers? The man was reportedly treated with a degree of respect, provided with fine clothes and good food, suggesting he was a person of significant status. This inconsistency is what fuels the most explosive and enduring conspiracy theory, that the masked man was none other than the identical twin brother of King Louis XIV himself. Imagine the existential threat such a person would represent. In an era of absolute monarchy where power was legitimized by divine right and bloodline, the existence of a perfect double would have been a political catastrophe. Any faction dissatisfied with Louis's rule could have used the twin as a pawn to stage a coup, claiming the real king was the one in the mask, or simply replacing the monarch with his brother to rule as a puppet. The very foundation of the Bourbon dynasty would have been instantly destabilized. This theory provides the most compelling motive for the prisoner's unique fate. Killing him would have been a sin of fratricide and risked the secret leaking out. Letting him live freely was unthinkable. The only logical solution was a third, horrifying option: to keep him alive but utterly anonymous, a living ghost hidden in plain sight. The legend was famously popularized by Alexander Dumas in his novel, which cemented the image of the Iron Mask in the public imagination. The story's persistence in culture speaks to a deep-seated fascination with the dark side of power, the idea that behind the glittering facade of Versailles, the king's authority was so fragile that it required the perpetual imprisonment of his own flesh and blood to maintain it. It transforms the story from a simple mystery into a powerful allegory about the sacrifices made for political stability and the monstrous lengths to which absolute power will go to protect itself. The man in the mask becomes a tragic symbol of the individual crushed by the machinery of the state, his very existence a secret too dangerous to be known. The shadowy intrigues of royal courts and lost treasures give way to a conspiracy set on the open ocean, a deliberate act of warfare that would alter the course of the 20th century. By the spring of 1915, the First World War had descended into a brutal stalemate on the Western Front. Desperate to break the deadlock, Germany had declared the waters around the British Isles a war zone, authorizing its U-boats to attack enemy vessels without warning. It was against this backdrop that the RMS Lusitania, one of the fastest and most luxurious passenger liners in the world, prepared for a voyage from New York to Liverpool. The German embassy in Washington took the unusual step of publishing a stark warning in American newspapers next to the ship's departure notice, cautioning travelers that vessels flying the flag of Great Britain were liable to destruction in the war zone. Many saw it as a bluff, a piece of psychological warfare. On May 7, 1915, just off the coast of Ireland, the bluff became a horrifying reality. A single torpedo from the German submarine U-20 struck the Lusitania, followed moments later by a second, much larger explosion. The ship listed violently and sank in just 18 minutes, taking 1,198 men, women, and children to their deaths, including 128 American citizens. The attack was immediately and universally condemned as an act of barbarism. Allied propaganda portrayed it as the quintessential example of German ruthlessness, a war crime against innocent civilians. The outrage in the United States was palpable, creating a powerful wave of public opinion that would eventually help push America into the war 2 years later. This is the narrative that has been taught for generations, the unprovoked sinking of a civilian vessel as a catalyst for American involvement. But what if this clear-cut story of good versus evil is incomplete? A more disturbing theory suggests that the Lusitania was not an innocent victim, but a pawn in a high-stakes game orchestrated by Winston Churchill, then the First Lord of the Admiralty, who may have deliberately placed the ship in harm's way to create precisely the diplomatic crisis that ensued. The evidence for this conspiracy begins with the Lusitania's cargo. While registered as a passenger liner, the ship was also an auxiliary cruiser of the British Royal Navy, and on its final voyage it was carrying a secret and highly volatile consignment. Official manifests were falsified, but later investigations, including the recovery of ammunition from the wreck site, confirmed that the Lusitania was transporting a significant quantity of war material. This included over 4 million rounds of rifle ammunition, shrapnel artillery shells, and other explosives. This fact is crucial as it means the German U-boat captain was, by the strict rules of naval warfare at the time, technically justified in targeting a vessel carrying contraband. More importantly, the presence of such a volatile cargo provides a plausible explanation for the second, catastrophic explosion that tore the ship apart so quickly. While the German government insisted it fired only one torpedo, survivors and some researchers believe the munitions on board detonated, sealing the ship's fate. The conspiracy deepens when we examine the actions and inactions of the British Admiralty in the days leading up to the disaster. British naval intelligence, through its famous Room 40, had broken German naval codes. They were aware that U-boats were active in the precise area where the Lusitania was scheduled to pass. Furthermore, the Admiralty knew the identity of the specific U-boat, the U-20, and its last reported position. Despite this intelligence, no extraordinary measures were taken to protect the ship. The Lusitania was not given a naval escort through the most dangerous stretch of water. Even more suspiciously, the ship's captain was not provided with the most up-to-date warnings about submarine activity. A cruiser that was supposed to meet the Lusitania was recalled by the Admiralty at the last moment. To conspiracy theorists, this pattern of negligence is not accidental. It is a deliberate setup. The goal, they argue, was to create an incident so shocking that American public opinion would be galvanized, overcoming the strong isolationist sentiment in the United States and drawing a powerful new ally into the war. The historical debate over British culpability remains fierce. Mainstream historians acknowledge the cargo and the intelligence failures but stop short of alleging a deliberate sacrifice. They argue that the British Admiralty was simply overwhelmed and incompetent, that the failure to protect the Lusitania was part of a broader pattern of miscommunication and bureaucratic bungling in the early years of the war. They point out that Churchill himself wrote a memo shortly before the sinking, pondering the value of luring neutral shipping into danger to embroil the United States, but there is no direct smoking gun order linking him to the specific fate of the Lusitania. Skeptics ask a compelling question: would Churchill or anyone in the British government really risk the deaths of hundreds of civilians, including influential Americans, on the chance that it would sway a neutral nation? It was a gamble with unimaginably high stakes, yet the conspiracy persists because it forces us to confront the ruthless calculus of total war. In this interpretation, the 1,198 souls aboard the Lusitania were not merely victims of a German torpedo, but casualties of a broader strategy where the end victory over Germany was seen to justify any means necessary. The tragedy stands as a stark reminder that in the fog of war, the line between tragic accident and cold-blooded manipulation can become dangerously blurred, and the official story is often written by the victors to conceal the more uncomfortable truths that lie beneath the surface. The assassination of President Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theater on April 14, 1865, is often remembered as the act of a single, fanatical actor, John Wilkes Booth. But to view this event as a solo mission is to ignore the chillingly coordinated nature of that terrible night. While Booth carried out the main objective, his fellow conspirators had been assigned their own grim tasks. On the very same evening, just a few blocks away, another member of Booth's circle, Lewis Powell, brutally attacked Secretary of State William Seward in his own bed, stabbing him multiple times and leaving him for dead. A third conspirator, George Atzerodt, had been tasked with murdering Vice President Andrew Johnson, but lost his nerve at the last moment and fled. This was not the work of a lone wolf. It was a sophisticated, multi-pronged strike designed to decapitate the entire Union government in one fell swoop, plunging the already war-weary nation into total chaos. This level of planning points to a conspiracy far larger than the small band of Southern sympathizers who were ultimately captured and tried. The theory goes that Booth, while a committed and charismatic leader, was likely a pawn in a much grander scheme orchestrated by high-ranking officials from the defeated Confederacy. With the Civil War effectively over after Lee's surrender at Appomattox just days earlier, hardline elements within the Confederate government were desperate to continue the fight by any means necessary. Eliminating the Union's leadership could have thrown the victors into disarray, potentially creating an opportunity for the South to regroup or negotiate a more favorable peace terms from a position of renewed strength. The target list itself is telling: Lincoln, the architect of reconciliation; Seward, his chief diplomat; and Johnson, who would succeed to the presidency. This was a strategic decapitation. The figure most frequently placed at the center of this broader web is Judah P. Benjamin, who served as the Confederate Secretary of State. Benjamin was a brilliant and elusive man, often called the brains of the Confederacy. In the final days of the war, he was a staunch advocate for continuing the struggle through guerrilla warfare after the conventional armies had surrendered. Following the assassination, Benjamin did not wait around to be captured. He fled the country, eventually making his way to England, where he lived out the rest of his life in comfort and never faced questioning about any potential involvement. While there is no direct evidence linking him to Booth, His sudden flight and his known advocacy for desperate measures have made him a prime suspect in the eyes of those who believe in a deeper conspiracy. The theory suggests that Benjamin, using Confederate Secret Service funds and contacts, may have helped finance and direct Booth's plot from a safe distance. The official government response to the assassination has itself become a primary source for conspiracy theories. The trial of the conspirators was conducted by a military tribunal, not a civilian court, and was marked by extreme haste and secrecy. 4 of the accused, including Mary Surratt, the first woman executed by the U.S. government, were hanged just 3 months after the assassination. This rush to judgment, critics argue, was intended to close the case quickly and silence the conspirators before they could reveal any connections to higher authorities. Furthermore, key evidence mysteriously disappeared, including pages from Booth's diary that were allegedly torn out by the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. Stanton's own actions have been scrutinized. He refused Army requests to provide a cavalry guard for Lincoln on the night of the assassination, and some have even alleged that he deliberately misdirected the manhunt for Booth in the days that followed. While mainstream historians largely dismiss the idea of Stanton's involvement as baseless, these inconsistencies have fed the narrative of an official cover-up designed to protect the nation from the terrifying truth that the rebellion may not have ended at Appomattox, but had instead launched a final, devastating covert attack. The enduring power of this conspiracy lies in the profound national trauma of Lincoln's death. The idea that a beloved leader was murdered by a single madman is a tragic but simple story. The alternative, that his killing was the result of a last-ditch political strategy by a defeated enemy, presents a far more unsettling vision of the war's end. It suggests that the conflict's bitterness ran so deep that even surrender could not extinguish the desire for vengeance, and that the battle lines simply shifted from the open fields of war to the shadowy corridors of power. Whether Booth was a lone extremist or the tip of a Confederate iceberg may never be proven beyond doubt, but the coordinated nature of the attacks and the unanswered questions surrounding the investigation ensure that the full story of that night in April remains one of American history's most haunting and unresolved mysteries. From the treacherous currents of international warfare, we now turn our attention to the vast, uncharted wilderness of the early American frontier, where another celebrated figure met a fate shrouded in contradiction. The names Meriwether Lewis and William Clark are synonymous with American exploration, the leaders of the Corps of Discovery whose epic journey from 1804 to 1806 mapped the Louisiana Purchase and opened the West. Lewis, in particular, was hailed as a national hero, a man of proven courage, resourcefulness, and intellect, hand-picked by President Thomas Jefferson himself. It is this very image of the capable frontiersman that makes his death just 3 years later so profoundly unsettling. In October 1809, Lewis was found dead in a remote inn along the Natchez Trace in Tennessee, far from the glory of his expedition. The official ruling was suicide, a conclusion that has been questioned from the moment it was declared, giving rise to a persistent conspiracy that the great explorer was, in fact, murdered. The circumstances of that night are riddled with inconsistencies that immediately cast doubt on the suicide narrative. Lewis was traveling to Washington, D.C. to resolve pressing financial issues concerning the publication of his expedition journals. He was reportedly in a state of deep depression and agitation, possibly suffering from what we would now recognize as post-traumatic stress or the effects of malaria and alcoholism. According to the innkeeper's wife, Mrs. Grinder, she heard gunshots in the night and found Lewis with 2 gunshot wounds, one to the head and one to the chest. He also had multiple slashes to his body, apparently from a razor. He lingered for several hours before dying at dawn. The local authorities conducted a swift inquest and concluded he had taken his own life. Yet for many, this account defies logic. How could a man in the throes of a suicidal episode inflict upon himself such a complex and inefficient series of injuries? The presence of multiple gunshot wounds from different weapons, a detail sometimes reported, is highly unusual for a suicide. Furthermore, Lewis was known to be an expert marksman. A botched suicide attempt seems inconsistent with his skills. This is where the conspiracy theory gains its traction, painting a picture of a political assassination disguised as a suicide. Lewis was not just a troubled hero, he was a man with powerful enemies. As the governor of the Upper Louisiana Territory, he had made political foes and was entangled in significant bureaucratic and financial disputes with the federal government. Most notably, he carried with him on his final journey the precious, unpublished journals from his expedition. These documents contained not only geographical data, but also sensitive information about his interactions with various interests in the West, including potentially damning evidence against one of the most corrupt and ambitious figures in early America, General James Wilkinson. Wilkinson, who was simultaneously a commanding general of the U.S. Army and a secret agent in the pay of Spain, had a long history of plotting to separate the Western territories from the United States. Lewis's expedition had encroached on what Wilkinson considered his own sphere of influence, and the governor's reports could have exposed Wilkinson's treasonous activities. The theory posits that Wilkinson, or associates acting on his behalf, arranged for Lewis to be ambushed and killed on the lonely Natchez Trace, a known haven for bandits. The murder could easily be staged to look like a suicide or a robbery gone wrong. The motive was to prevent Lewis from reaching Washington, D.C., where he intended to clear his name and, in doing so, might have inadvertently revealed secrets that would have led to Wilkinson's downfall. Lewis's significant debts and known mental state made him the perfect victim for such a plot. His death would be readily accepted as a desperate act of a man pushed to the brink, allowing the real conspirators to escape justice. Even the behavior of the innkeepers, the grinders, has been called into question. Their delayed response to the gunshots and the vague, changing nature of their testimony have been cited as evidence that they may have been intimidated or even complicit in the event. The debate between the suicide and murder theories remains a fierce one among historians. Those who support the official ruling point to the well-documented accounts of Lewis's mental decline, his prior suicide attempts, and the immense pressure he was under. They argue that the chaotic nature of the wounds is consistent with the actions of a profoundly disturbed individual. However, the murder theory endures because it offers a more coherent explanation for the specific, violent facts of the case. It transforms a personal tragedy into a national one, suggesting that one of America's greatest explorers may have been eliminated by the very dark forces of corruption and ambition that the young republic was struggling to overcome. The mystery of Meriwether Lewis's death is a stark reminder that the frontier was not just a place of opportunity, but also a lawless arena where a man's greatest discoveries could become his most dangerous possessions. After the intense gravity of political assassinations and shadowy wartime plots, we arrive at a conflict so peculiar it seems almost like satire. A moment in history where a national army squared off against an enemy that could not reason, surrender, or even hold a weapon. Welcome to the Great Emu War of 1932, an event that unfolded in the vast, sun-scorched farmlands of Western Australia. The official story begins with veterans of the First World War who had been given land by the government to become wheat farmers. As the Great Depression tightened its grip, these settlers faced a catastrophic new threat. Not drought or market collapse, but an invasion of some 20,000 emus. These large, flightless birds, driven from the arid interior by a search for water and food, descended upon the farming districts like a feathered plague. They trampled crops, broke through fences, and devoured the precious wheat, pushing the already struggling veterans to the brink of ruin. In desperation, the farmers petitioned the government for help, and surprisingly, the Minister of Defense agreed to deploy soldiers armed with Lewis machine guns to cull the emu population. It was a decision that would lead to one of the most humiliating military engagements in modern history. The campaign, led by Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery, was an exercise in futility from the start. The emus proved to be formidable guerrilla opponents. They scattered in small, highly mobile groups, making them difficult targets for the machine gunners. The birds could absorb multiple bullets and keep running, their tough feathers and robust bodies allowing them to survive wounds that would drop other creatures. Newspaper reports from the time chronicled the farce with a mixture of amusement and disbelief, describing the soldiers' attempts to ambush the birds only to have their guns jam or their targets vanish into the outback. After several days of intense but largely ineffective operations, the military withdrew, having killed only a fraction of the emu population. A second campaign was launched shortly after, but the results were similarly dismal. In the end, the Australian army was forced to admit defeat, retreating from the field while the emus continued their reign over the farmland. The official narrative paints the event as a well-intentioned but laughable failure, a quirky anecdote about man versus nature where nature won a decisive victory. Yet beneath this comical surface lies a more cynical and politically charged conspiracy. What if the entire emu war was never truly about helping farmers? What if the plight of the veterans was merely a convenient pretext for a very different set of objectives? During the Great Depression, military budgets around the world were under intense scrutiny. In Australia, there was significant public pressure to reduce defense spending at a time when the armed forces were eager to modernize and prove their relevance. The emu problem presented a perfect opportunity. By deploying the army, the government could justify the use of its equipment and personnel in a real-world scenario, all under the sympathetic banner of aiding returned servicemen. This theory suggests the true goal was a live-fire training exercise, a chance to test the mobility, logistics, and effectiveness of their machine guns and personnel in the challenging Australian terrain, with the emus serving as unpredictable moving targets. It was a risk-free way to maintain military readiness and gather valuable data without the political backlash of an overtly large defense appropriation. An even darker interpretation posits that the event was a cleverly disguised propaganda stunt. The 1930s were a period of rising global tension, and governments were keenly aware of the need to maintain public morale and a sense of national strength. A light-hearted, almost cartoonish conflict against a bizarre animal enemy could serve as a useful distraction from the grinding hardships of the Depression. The newspapers played along, turning the military's embarrassment into a national joke, which in itself can be a form of social control. It is difficult to riot over breadlines when the front page is filled with stories of soldiers being outwitted by birds. Furthermore, by presenting the army as actively solving a problem, even a ridiculous one, the government could foster a perception of competence and action, subtly reinforcing the idea that the military was a vital and responsive national institution worthy of public support and funding. The very absurdity of the war acted as a smokescreen, making it almost impossible for critics to take the event seriously enough to question the underlying motives. The enduring fascination with the Great Emu War lies in this duality. On one hand, it is a genuinely funny story, a reminder that history is not always about grand strategies and epic battles. On the other, it serves as a case study in how governments can use spectacle and narrative to achieve strategic goals. Whether it was primarily a training exercise, a propaganda effort, or simply a botched attempt at pest control, the event demonstrates how official stories can mask more complex realities. The farmers, for their part, saw little benefit. They eventually resumed culling the emus themselves using bounty systems, which proved far more effective than machine guns. The emus, of course, remained blissfully unaware of their place in history, having won a war they never knew they were fighting. This bizarre chapter challenges our definitions of conflict and power, suggesting that sometimes the most revealing government secrets are not hidden in locked vaults, but are playing out in plain sight, disguised as a joke. While tales of lost legions and hidden royal twins capture our imagination, sometimes the most compelling conspiracies are born not in the distant past, but in the very recent shadow of modern warfare and cutting-edge science. Our next story catapults us from the battlefields of old to the dawn of the Cold War, with a legend so incredible it feels ripped from the pages of a science fiction novel. This is the story of the Philadelphia experiment, a tale that alleges the United States Navy successfully achieved the impossible, rendering a warship completely invisible and teleporting it across space in an instant. The core of the story is both dramatic and chilling. According to the most common version of the legend, in October of 1943, the U.S. Navy conducted a top-secret experiment at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The subject was the USS Eldridge, a Cannon-class destroyer escort. The goal was to make the ship undetectable to enemy radar using a revolutionary application of Albert Einstein's unified field theory. By generating an incredibly powerful electromagnetic field around the vessel, scientists supposedly bent light and radio waves around it, causing the Eldridge to vanish from sight in a greenish haze. But the experiment allegedly went far beyond its intended scope. Witnesses claimed the ship didn't just become invisible. It briefly teleported from its dock in Philadelphia to the naval base in Norfolk, Virginia, over 200 miles away, appearing there for several minutes before flashing back to its original position. The supposed consequences for the crew, however, were nothing short of horrifying. It is said that the immense forces involved had catastrophic effects on the sailors aboard. Some men were said to have gone completely insane, while others suffered from severe nausea and disorientation. The most gruesome claim is that several crew members were physically fused into the metal structure of the ship itself, their bodies merging horrifically with the bulkheads and deck. Those who survived were reportedly subjected to mental reprogramming or discharged under conditions of extreme secrecy to ensure the truth of the experiment never leaked out. This narrative paints a picture of a government pushing the boundaries of science with reckless abandon, willing to sacrifice its own personnel in pursuit of a game-changing military advantage. The origins of this fantastic story, however, are far more mundane and reveal how easily fact can be twisted into folklore. The entire legend can be traced back to a single individual, Carl Meredith Allen, who wrote under the name Carlos Allen. In the late 1950s, Allen began sending a series of rambling letters to astronomer and UFO enthusiast Morris K. Jessup. In these letters, Allen claimed to have witnessed the events firsthand from a nearby merchant ship, the SS Andrew Furuseth. He provided vivid, if inconsistent, details and cited non-existent newspaper articles as proof. Investigative journalists and Navy officials who later looked into his claims found no evidence to support them. The personal files of Albert Einstein, whose theories were central to the legend, contained no work on invisibility or teleportation for the military. Furthermore, the logbooks of both the USS Eldridge and the SS Andrew Furuseth placed the two ships on opposite sides of the globe at the time of the alleged experiment. So how did such an elaborate myth take root? The first and most plausible explanation involves a real, but far less spectacular, naval process called degaussing. During World War II, the threat of magnetic mines was very real. These mines would detonate when they detected the magnetic signature of a ship's metal hull. To counter this, the Navy fitted ships with degaussing coils, which generated an electrical current to neutralize the vessel's magnetic field, effectively making it invisible to the mines. The process of installing and testing these coils at the Philadelphia shipyard was highly classified at the time. To a casual observer without security clearance, seeing a ship surrounded by electrical cables and strange equipment could easily have been misinterpreted as something far more mysterious, especially when combined with the natural secrecy and rumors that thrive in any military environment. The persistence of the Philadelphia experiment myth speaks to powerful undercurrents in the public psyche, particularly during the Cold War. The post-war era was a time of unprecedented government secrecy, with black budgets funding advanced aerospace and weapons projects like the U-2 spy plane and early satellite programs. This culture of secrecy created a fertile ground for speculation. If the government was developing flying saucers at Area 51, why couldn't it also be experimenting with invisibility and teleportation a decade earlier? The legend also taps into a deep public fascination with the paranormal and the idea that military agencies might be exploring the fringes of science, from psychic spies to anti-gravity devices. The story provides a compelling, albeit frightening, narrative that explains complex scientific concepts like electromagnetic fields in a simple, dramatic way, offering a tantalizing glimpse into a hidden world of technological wonders and horrors. Ultimately, the Philadelphia experiment endures not because there is evidence for it, but because it represents a perfect storm of historical context, scientific mystery, and human imagination. It is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked technological ambition, a sci-fi thriller born from the misinterpretation of mundane wartime technology. The legend forces us to question what we truly know about the classified research conducted behind closed doors, reminding us that sometimes the most incredible stories are born not from what is hidden, but from our own powerful desire to believe that the boundaries of reality are far more flexible than they appear. The trajectory of American power took a sudden and violent turn at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, on September 6, 1901. President William McKinley, a champion of industrial growth and economic prosperity, was greeting the public in a receiving line when a man stepped forward, his hand wrapped in a bandage as if he were injured. Concealed within the cloth was a .32 caliber revolver. 2 shots rang out. The president was mortally wounded, and 8 days later he was dead. His assassin, Leon Czolgosz, was a self-proclaimed anarchist, a lone individual acting out of a twisted sense of political idealism. The case was closed with swift and brutal efficiency. Czolgosz was tried, convicted, and executed by electrocution just over a month after the shooting. The official narrative was clean, simple, and deeply satisfying to a nation in mourning, a beloved leader struck down by the isolated act of a madman. But the seamless nature of this story is precisely what has fueled a persistent alternative theory for over a century. This conspiracy shifts the focus from the obvious culprit, Czolgosz, to the man who benefited most directly from McKinley's death, his dynamic and ambitious vice president, Theodore Roosevelt. At the time of the assassination, Roosevelt was far from the scene, hiking in the Adirondack Mountains. Upon receiving the news, he rushed to Buffalo, but not before McKinley had already passed away. Within hours, Roosevelt was sworn in as the 26th President of the United States. His ascent to the highest office was stunningly rapid. Just a few years earlier, he had been the governor of New York, a position from which the state's powerful political machine, led by Senator Thomas Platt, was eager to be rid of him due to his reformist tendencies. The vice presidency was seen as a political graveyard, a place to sideline the energetic and unpredictable Roosevelt. McKinley's death, therefore, did not just make Roosevelt president. It liberated him from a role meant to contain his influence, handing him the power to pursue a vastly more aggressive and expansionist agenda. The theory of foreknowledge or even facilitation does not suggest that Theodore Roosevelt personally ordered the murder. Instead, it posits that individuals within his political circle, or perhaps even elements within the government sympathetic to his goals, may have allowed the assassination to happen by creating the conditions that made it possible. The first piece of circumstantial evidence often cited is the astonishingly lax security at the Pan American Exposition. Despite clear and public threats from anarchist groups following the assassination of other world leaders, the protection for President McKinley was shockingly inadequate. His personal secretary, George B. Cortelyou, who was deeply concerned about the risk, had actually tried to remove the public reception from the president's schedule twice, but McKinley himself had reinstated it. The security detail on the day was minimal, and the line to meet the president was not properly screened. The man assigned to protect McKinley, a former Buffalo detective, was standing feet away but was distracted at the critical moment. To conspiracy theorists, this pattern of negligence is suspicious. It suggests a possible deliberate weakening of the security cordon, creating an opportunity that a lone anarchist would be all too likely to exploit. Furthermore, the aftermath of the assassination raises questions about the speed and finality with which the investigation was concluded. Leon C. Zolgos was isolated immediately after his arrest. He was subjected to a brutal interrogation that some reports suggest may have included a form of the newly developed third-degree technique, and he was prevented from speaking with an attorney of his own choosing. The official narrative that he acted entirely alone was established with remarkable haste. While C. Zolgos never wavered in his claim of sole responsibility, the rapidity of his trial and execution ensured that no deeper lines of inquiry could be pursued. Could he have been manipulated or encouraged by agent provocateurs linked to political factions eager for a change in leadership? Was his trial rushed to prevent any uncomfortable connections from being revealed? There is no concrete evidence for this, but the lack of a thorough, drawn-out judicial process has always been a point of contention for those who suspect a wider plot. This theory is without a doubt on the fringes of historical scholarship and is widely dismissed by mainstream historians. They argue that the security lapses were a product of a different era, a time when presidents were far more accessible and the concept of a dedicated professional secret service did not yet exist. Roosevelt's dramatic rise, they contend, was a tragic coincidence, a twist of fate that propelled a destined leader into power sooner than expected. The idea that a political faction would orchestrate the murder of a sitting president is seen as anachronistic, projecting the paranoia of later conspiracies onto a more straightforward, if brutal, period. Yet the power of this what-if scenario lies in its exploration of political opportunism. It forces us to consider how a catastrophic event can be leveraged by those positioned to benefit. Theodore Roosevelt's presidency fundamentally altered America's trajectory, launching an era of progressive reform and assertive global power. The conspiracy theory asks us to sit with an uncomfortable possibility that the 20th century, often called the American century, may have been born not just from tragedy, but from a tragedy that was, at the very least, convenient for those who would shape its course. It is a stark reminder that in the complex calculus of power, the line between tragic accident and strategic opening can become perilously thin. Our exploration of historical mysteries now takes us from the orchestrated chaos of the political world to the silent, unforgiving expanse of the Ural Mountains, to a case so chillingly bizarre it has baffled investigators and theorists for over half a century. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident, a tragedy where the official explanation feels less like an answer and more like the beginning of a much deeper, more disturbing question. In the winter of 1959, a group of 10 experienced Soviet hikers, mostly students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, embarked on a trek through the northern Urals. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, a skilled and cautious outdoorsman. The journey was meant to culminate in the difficult-to-attain Authorship Mountain, a feat that would earn them the coveted Grade 3 hiking certification. They were not novices, they were well-equipped, disciplined, and prepared for the harsh winter conditions, but something went terribly wrong. When the group failed to send a scheduled telegram, a massive search party was launched. What they discovered on the slopes of Kolatsiak, a mountain whose name ominously translates to Dead Mountain, would become the stuff of enduring legend. The scene at the campsite was one of profound and inexplicable chaos. The hiker's tent was found cut open from the inside, as if its occupants had fled in a desperate, slashing hurry. Their belongings, warm clothes, boots, and supplies were left behind, a decision tantamount to suicide in the sub-zero temperatures. The first two bodies were discovered near the remnants of a fire, dressed only in their underwear. As the search continued through the deep snow, the full horror unfolded. The remaining hikers were found scattered in various states of undress, some with horrific internal injuries, including crushed ribs and a fractured skull, yet with no corresponding external wounds, as if they had been subjected to an immense crushing force. One young woman was missing her tongue. Perhaps most baffling of all, some of the victims' clothing was found to contain traces of radioactive contamination. The official investigation, closed after a few months, concluded that the group had fallen victim to a compelling natural force, a vague and deeply unsatisfying term that essentially ended the state's interest in the case. This official silence and ambiguity have fueled a universe of conspiracy theories, each attempting to explain the inexplicable. One of the most persistent ideas centers on a catastrophic secret military test. The remote Dyatlov Pass was near the path of Soviet missile test ranges, and some speculate the hikers inadvertently witnessed the crash of an experimental weapon, perhaps a new rocket or a drone. To recover the sensitive technology and silence the witnesses, a military unit may have descended upon the camp, using force to drive the hikers from their tent and eliminate them. This could account for the strange injuries. The internal trauma could be consistent with a powerful shockwave from an explosion, and the presence of soldiers would explain the need for a swift, brutal cover-up. The radiation on the clothing adds a sinister layer, hinting at the possible use of a weapon involving radioactive materials, a chilling possibility during the height of the Cold War arms race. A related theory suggests the hikers didn't just witness a crash, but actually stumbled upon a clandestine military facility hidden in the mountains. The Soviet Union was notorious for its secret cities and hidden installations, often not marked on any public maps. If the group had accidentally ventured too close to such a site, they could have been perceived as spies or a security threat. The panicked flight from the tent, the bizarre injuries, and the subsequent official obfuscation all fit a narrative of a state-sanctioned operation to neutralize a perceived breach of security. The lack of obvious bullet wounds is often cited as a counter-argument, but proponents point to specialized, non-ballistic weapons or even the use of physical force by highly trained personnel as possible explanations for the unique trauma. Of course, numerous natural explanations have also been proposed, though each faces significant challenges. Some scientists have suggested the phenomenon of infrasound, low-frequency sound waves inaudible to the human ear that can be generated by strong winds passing over mountain ridges. In certain conditions, infrasound can induce feelings of extreme dread, panic, and even chest pains, which might explain why the hikers tore their way out of the tent in a blind, irrational fear. However, this theory struggles to account for the severe physical injuries or the radiation. Another, more folkloric explanation points to an attack by the indigenous Mansi people or even a mythical Yeti. Yet, footprints at the scene showed no signs of other humans or large creatures, and the Mansi people were cleared of any involvement by the original investigators. The enduring power of the Dyatlov Pass mystery lies in the terrifying convergence of so many abnormal details. It is not one strange clue, but a cascade of them. The tent cut from the inside, the inadequate clothing, the inexplicable injuries, the missing tongue, the radioactive traces. The official, compelling natural force explanation feels like a placeholder for a truth too uncomfortable to disclose. Whether it was a secret weapons test, a fatal encounter with a hidden military presence, or a natural event far stranger than we currently understand, the incident stands as a stark reminder of the vast, unknown dangers that can lurk in the wilderness and the chilling efficiency with which a powerful state can bury the truth. The 9 hikers on the slope of Col met a fate that defies easy categorization, leaving behind a puzzle that continues to challenge our understanding of what is possible and what those in power might be willing to hide. Crossing the Atlantic from the icy slopes of the Ural Mountains, we arrive at the humid, mosquito-filled shores of what is now North Carolina, to witness a disappearance so complete it has become the foundational ghost story of American history. In the late 16th century, England was a latecomer to the race for New World colonies, watching with envy as Spain grew fabulously wealthy from its American empires. Sir Walter Raleigh, a favorite of Queen Elizabeth I, was granted a charter to establish the first permanent English settlement in the New World. The chosen site was Roanoke Island, a precarious outpost on the edge of a vast and unknown continent. The first group of colonists sent in 1585 struggled immensely and were eventually rescued and returned to England. Undeterred, Raleigh sent a second, larger group of 115 men, women, and children in 1587, led by Governor John White. The settlement was meant to be self-sustaining, but tensions with local indigenous tribes and a critical shortage of supplies quickly forced Governor White to sail back to England for reinforcements. His timing could not have been worse. His departure coincided with the looming threat of the Spanish Armada, and all English ships were commandeered for the defense of the realm. For 3 long years, White was trapped in England, unable to return to the colony he had left behind, a colony that included his own daughter and infant granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. When Governor White finally managed to secure passage and set foot back on Roanoke Island in the year 1590, he found a scene of profound and eerie silence. The entire settlement was deserted. The houses and fortifications had been carefully dismantled, suggesting a planned departure, not a panicked flight. There were no signs of a struggle, no graves, and no cross, the prearranged signal the colonists were supposed to leave if they were in distress. The only clues were 2 cryptic carvings. On a post of the fort, the word Croatoan was carved in capital letters. On a tree nearby, the letters Crow were found. To White, this was a message of hope. The Croatoan were the name of a friendly tribe living on a nearby island, now known as Hatteras Island. He believed the colonists had simply relocated there to wait for his return. But a sudden, violent storm prevented his ships from sailing south to investigate, and they were forced to return to England. The 115 souls of the lost colony were never seen by English eyes again, their fate sealed into one of history's greatest enigmas. The most widely accepted and optimistic theory is that the colonists, facing starvation and hostile neighbors, did exactly as the carving suggested and integrated with the Croatoan people. Over the years, there have been tantalizing reports that seem to support this. In the early 17th century, Jamestown settlers heard accounts from various Algonquian tribes about people who dressed and lived like Englishmen further south. John Smith of Jamestown even wrote about receiving a message from a chief named Powhatan, who claimed to have attacked the Roanoke colonists and slaughtered them, displaying a musket and a brass mortar as proof. However, Powhatan's account is often viewed with skepticism, as it may have been a boastful story meant to intimidate the new English arrivals. More compelling are the oral histories of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, who have long claimed descent from the lost colonists. Many Lumbee members have distinctly European features, and some of their surnames, like Locklear and Dial, bear a striking resemblance to the names of the Roanoke settlers. While DNA evidence has so far been inconclusive, the integration theory offers a peaceful resolution, suggesting the colonists didn't vanish, but were absorbed into a new culture, becoming the first truly American melting pot. This hopeful narrative, however, is shadowed by a much darker possibility rooted in the fierce geopolitical rivalry of the age. Spain considered the entire New World its domain by papal decree, and the establishment of an English colony was an act of outright aggression. Spanish authorities in Florida were well aware of the Roanoke venture and had every incentive to eliminate it. Spanish ships frequently sailed up the coast, and it is entirely plausible that a Spanish expedition, perhaps searching for the English settlement to destroy it, found the vulnerable colony. If the Spanish had attacked, they would have likely taken any survivors as prisoners or slaves, erasing the settlement without a trace. The lack of obvious battle evidence could be explained if the colonists, seeing the overwhelming force arrayed against them, surrendered without a fight. This theory transforms the story from a mystery of assimilation into a tragic casualty of the Cold War between England and Spain, a conflict fought on a global stage where a small, isolated community would have been an easy and symbolic target for annihilation. But perhaps the most intricate conspiracy implicates the very power structure that sent the colonists to Roanoke in the first place. The Elizabethan court was a viper's nest of intrigue, and Sir Walter Raleigh had powerful enemies. Chief among them was Sir Francis Walsingham, Queen Elizabeth's spymaster and the head of a formidable intelligence network. While Walsingham is often portrayed as a patriot, his loyalty was to the Queen and the Protestant cause, not necessarily to his rivals at court. Raleigh's colonial ambitions represented a significant power grab. A successful colony would make him immensely wealthy and influential. Some theorists suggest that Walsingham, or factions aligned with him, may have actively worked to sabotage the Roanoke venture to keep Raleigh in check. This could have taken the form of deliberately delaying supply ships, planting disinformation about the colony's viability, or even sending agents to secretly foment discord between the colonists and the local tribes, ensuring the settlement's failure. The cryptic word Croatoan itself has been re-examined through this lens. Could it have been a red herring carved not by the colonists but by saboteurs to lead any rescuers on a wild goose chase while the colonists met a different, more sinister fate elsewhere? The political machinations of the Elizabethan court were complex and ruthless enough to make such a plot frighteningly plausible, suggesting that the colony may have been a pawn sacrificed in a much larger game of power played an ocean away. The lost colony of Roanoke thus stands as a multifaceted mystery, a puzzle where the pieces can be arranged to tell a story of peaceful integration, foreign aggression, or domestic treachery, each version reflecting the complex and dangerous world from which these first English pioneers embarked. While the Dyatlov Pass and Roanoke mysteries speak to forces outside of human control, our next conspiracy suggests a pattern woven directly into the fabric of American political destiny itself, a pattern so precise and deadly it defies mere coincidence. This is the legend of Tecumseh's curse, also known as the Curse of Tippecanoe, a supposed hex that placed a chilling expiration date on the highest office in the land. The pattern is stark and undeniable. Beginning in 1840 and continuing for over a century, every single American president elected in a year ending in 0 died while serving in office. The grim roster includes William Henry Harrison, Abraham Lincoln, James Garfield, William McKinley, Warren Harding, Franklin Roosevelt, and John F. Kennedy. 7 presidents, all elected at 20-year intervals, all meeting an untimely end. This eerie synchronicity is one of the most famous coincidences in political history, but the story behind its supposed origin points to a moment of profound injustice and a promise of vengeance. The curse is attributed to the great Shawnee leader Tecumseh, a visionary who sought to unite Native American tribes into a powerful confederacy to resist the relentless westward expansion of American settlers. His ambitions were dealt a crushing blow in 1811 at the Battle of Tippecanoe. The American forces were led by General William Henry Harrison, who attacked and destroyed Tecumseh's village while the leader was away recruiting allies. Although Tecumseh himself was not present, his brother, Tenskwatawa, known as the Prophet, was defeated, and the Confederacy's momentum was broken. According to legend, a furious Tecumseh called upon the Great Spirit to exact revenge, proclaiming that Harrison would not only die in office, but that every great chief chosen every 20 years thereafter would also be struck down, ensuring that the people would remember the death of his own. The prophecy's first victim was indeed Harrison himself. Elected in 1840, he delivered a famously long inaugural address on a cold, wet day without a coat, contracted pneumonia, and died just 1 month into his term, the shortest presidency in American history. To believers, this was not a random illness, it was the first stroke of a supernatural retribution. The debate between coincidence and causation is the central tension of this story. Skeptics, which include most historians and statisticians, argue that the pattern is a classic example of apophenia, the human tendency to perceive meaningful connections in random data. They point out that the 0-year election cycle is an arbitrary marker, and that over a span of 120 years, the deaths of several presidents in office, while tragic, is not statistically impossible, especially given the realities of 19th-century medicine and the emergence of political violence. The deaths of Harrison, Garfield, McKinley, and Lincoln can be attributed to a combination of poor medical knowledge and the actions of lone assassins, not a mystical force. Even the inclusion of Franklin Roosevelt, who died of a cerebral hemorrhage in 1945, is seen as a stretch. He was elected 4 times, so his death in office was likely, curse or not. However, this is where the conspiracy theory takes a fascinating turn from the supernatural to the psychological. What if the power of the curse wasn't in any actual magic, but in the power of suggestion? Once the pattern was recognized and publicized, it could have created a dangerous cultural meme. This idea posits that the legend of the curse itself may have become a self-fulfilling prophecy, providing a template or an inspiration for would-be assassins. Consider the case of John F. Kennedy. By 1960, the 0-year curse was a well-known piece of American folklore. Did the widespread knowledge of this pattern plant a seed in the mind of Lee Harvey Oswald or others? Could an assassin see themselves not just as a lone gunman, but as an unwitting agent of a historical destiny, adding a layer of grand significance to their terrible act? The curse, in this interpretation, is not a supernatural force but a psychological weapon, a narrative of inevitability that could influence the actions of unstable individuals. A more grounded conspiracy suggests the pattern could have been exploited in a different way. What if political adversaries or powerful hidden interests, aware of the curse's hold on the public imagination, saw an opportunity? If a president elected in a 0-year was perceived as vulnerable or marked, it could have emboldened his enemies. They might calculate that any action taken against him could be more easily explained away as fate, a tragic fulfillment of an ancient prophecy rather than a deliberate political murder. This wouldn't require a grand, centralized conspiracy, but rather a diffusion of the idea that such a president was living on borrowed time, creating an environment where plots could flourish with a perceived sense of impunity. The curse would act as a smokescreen, a pre-written narrative to obscure the true motives behind an assassination. The entire dynamic of the curse was shattered in 1980. Ronald Reagan, elected in the next 0-year, survived an assassination attempt by John Hinckley Jr. Just 2 months into his presidency. The bullet ricocheted off his limousine and struck him under the arm, narrowly missing his heart. Reagan's famous humor and resilience in the face of death seemed to break the spell. Many attributed his survival to modern medical technology, the swift response of his Secret Service detail, or simply luck. But for believers in the curse, his survival required a different explanation. Some suggested that the curse had a time limit, its power fading after 7 cycles. Others proposed that Reagan's own mystical beliefs or the prayers of the nation had counteracted the ancient hex. The breaking of the pattern with Reagan offers the final, confounding twist to the tale. It leaves us with an unanswerable question. Was the curse real but its power finally spent? Or was Reagan's survival the ultimate proof that it was never anything more than a chilling and persistent coincidence all along? Tecumseh's curse remains a powerful story because it forces us to confront the lines we draw between history and legend, and the unsettling possibility that narratives once set in motion can acquire a power of their own to shape events. From the calculated patterns of political curses, we turn to a tale of personal tragedy and desperate hope, a story that gave birth to one of the 20th century's most poignant and persistent legends. In the early hours of July 17, 1918, in a basement room of the Ipatiev House in the city of Yekaterinburg, the final chapter of the 300-year Romanov dynasty was written in blood. The former Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Tsarina Alexandra, and their 5 children Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and the hemophiliac heir, Alexei, along with their loyal servants, were awakened and led downstairs under the pretext of an impending rescue. Instead, they were met by a Bolshevik firing squad. The execution was brutal and chaotic, with bullets ricocheting off jewels secretly sewn into the women's corsets, creating a scene of horrific confusion before the entire family was finally murdered and their bodies disposed of in a secret grave in the nearby Koptyaki forest. The official Soviet announcement was deliberately vague, stating only that the Tsar had been executed, leaving the fate of his wife and children a subject of intense speculation and, for many, fervent hope. In the chaotic aftermath of the Russian Revolution and the ensuing Civil War, this ambiguity was the fertile ground from which a powerful myth grew, the story that the youngest daughter, the vivacious and mischievous Grand Duchess Anastasia, had somehow miraculously survived the massacre. The legend suggested that in the smoky confusion of the basement, Anastasia had been shielded by the bodies of her family or had simply fainted, only to be discovered later by a sympathetic guard who helped her escape. This narrative was incredibly seductive. The idea that a young, innocent girl could have cheated the brutal fate of her family tapped into a deep well of sympathy, especially among Russian monarchists and a watching world horrified by the revolution's violence. It offered a thread of redemption, a possibility that not all the Romanovs had been extinguished, and that a spark of the old imperial Russia might still flicker somewhere in the shadows. This hope found its most famous face in a woman known as Anna Anderson, who emerged in Berlin in 1920. Rescued after a suicide attempt, she was initially placed in a mental asylum. For years, she remained silent about her past, but gradually she began to drop hints, eventually claiming to be the Grand Duchess Anastasia. Her story was riddled with inconsistencies, and her knowledge of the imperial court was patchy. Yet she possessed an uncanny ability to recognize faces from old photographs and recall obscure details of life within the palace that seemed to give her claim credibility. More compelling than any specific fact was her demeanor. She was described as haughty, temperamental, and possessing an imperious air that convinced many, including some distant Romanov relatives, that she was indeed the lost princess. For decades, Anna Anderson waged a legal and public relations battle to be recognized as Anastasia, her case becoming a global media sensation and the subject of books and films that cemented the survival legend in popular culture. For over half a century, the mystery persisted, a duel between the compelling emotional testimony of supporters and the firm denials of surviving Romanovs and historians. The scientific breakthrough that would ultimately shatter the legend began in 1979, when amateur sleuths using old maps located the primary burial site of the Romanovs. However, the official exhumation did not occur until after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. When forensic scientists examined the remains, they made a startling discovery that reignited the conspiracy. The grave contained only 9 skeletons, not 11. The bodies of the Tsarevich Alexei and one of the young duchesses initially thought to be Maria or Anastasia were missing. For believers, this was the final, definitive proof. The 2 missing bodies seemed to validate the survival stories, suggesting that at least one of the children had escaped the fate of their parents. The conclusive chapter in this saga was written by the indisputable language of DNA. In the 1990s, scientists conducted mitochondrial DNA testing, which is passed down virtually unchanged from mother to child. They compared the remains of the Tsarina and her children to a living relative, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, whose grandmother was Tsarina Alexandra's sister. The match was perfect, confirming the identities of the 9 recovered bodies beyond any doubt. The final blow to Anna Anderson's claim came when DNA from a tissue sample she had left in an American hospital was compared to the Romanov remains. There was no relation. Further testing revealed her true identity. She was Franziska Szankowska, a Polish factory worker who had suffered a mental breakdown and disappeared, a tragic figure who had woven a new identity from the threads of a global tragedy. Later, in 2007, the mystery of the 2 missing bodies was finally solved when the remains of Alexei and Maria were discovered in a separate, shallower grave nearby, confirming that no one had escaped the Ipatiev house basement alive. Why then did the legend of Anastasia's survival prove so incredibly resilient, even in the face of overwhelming scientific evidence? The answer lies in the profound psychological needs the story fulfilled. In the face of an almost unimaginable atrocity, the murder of innocent children, the human spirit rebels, the survival conspiracy offered a narrative of hope and redemption, a refusal to accept that such brutality could be so absolute and final. It was a story that provided comfort to a world traumatized by war and revolution, a fairy tale ending where the princess against all odds lives. The Anastasia myth was not just about one girl. It was a symbol of resistance to the cold, impersonal forces of history, a testament to the enduring power of the idea that even in the darkest of times, a spark of life can endure. It remains a powerful reminder that some mysteries captivate us not because they are true, but because we so desperately need them to be. Just a few months after the attack on Pearl Harbor plunged the United States into the Second World War, a fresh wave of panic gripped the West Coast. In the early hours of February 25, 1942, air raid sirens began to wail across Los Angeles. A city already on edge from fears of a Japanese invasion plunged into a state of total blackout. Then, at around 3 in the morning, the night sky erupted. Searchlight beams from dozens of army batteries crisscrossed the darkness, suddenly converging on a single, slow-moving object hovering over the coastline. What happened next was a sustained barrage of anti-aircraft fire unlike anything seen before on the American mainland. For over an hour, American forces unleashed a storm of steel, firing more than 1,400 shells into the heavens at the unidentified target. Shell fragments rained down on the city, damaging buildings and vehicles, and tragically, the stress of the event was linked to several fatal heart attacks among civilians. When the sun rose, the military had a pressing mystery on its hands. They had fired enough munitions to obliterate an entire squadron of enemy aircraft, yet no wreckage was ever found. No bombs had been dropped and no enemy plane was shot down. The official explanation, issued after a swift inquiry, was that the entire incident had been a case of mass hysteria, triggered by war nerves and a stray weather balloon. But for many who witnessed the event, and for conspiracy theorists ever since, this explanation has never come close to fitting the facts. The most compelling evidence against the war nerves theory comes from the official photographs taken that night. One particular image, published in the Los Angeles Times, is startlingly clear. It shows multiple searchlights focused intently on a distinct, solid-looking object suspended in THEIR Chinese letter. The object is not a blur or a smudge of light. It appears to have a defined, elliptical shape, seemingly hovering calmly at the center of the intense illumination while shells burst all around it. Eyewitness reports from that night corroborate the photographic evidence. Citizens, police officers, and even experienced army personnel described seeing a large, silent craft moving slowly and deliberately along a path from Santa Monica to Long Beach. This was not a fast-moving fighter plane or a fleeting speck in the sky. The object's slow, steady pace and its ability to withstand the incredible volume of fire directed at it suggests something far more advanced than any known technology of the era. If it was a conventional aircraft, why did it not evade the attack or return fire? And most perplexingly, if it was simply a balloon, how did it remain perfectly stationary in the crosshairs of the searchlights for such an extended period while enduring the concussive force of hundreds of exploding shells? This disconnect between the visual evidence and the official statement has fueled a range of alternative theories, each proposing a different identity for the mysterious intruder. The most grounded conspiracy suggests that the object was a sophisticated Japanese reconnaissance plane, perhaps launched from a submarine lurking off the coast. The purpose of such a mission would have been to probe American coastal defenses and test their reaction times. This theory would explain the military's initial alarm and the ferocity of their response. However, it fails to address the core mysteries: the craft's slow, silent movement, its apparent invulnerability to anti-aircraft fire, and the complete absence of any wreckage. Japan never claimed responsibility for such a flight, and after the war, Japanese military records contained no mention of any aircraft being over Los Angeles that night. If it was an enemy plane, it was one that defied all contemporary understanding of aviation and left no trace of its existence. The failure of the conventional explanations naturally leads to a more extraordinary possibility: that the object was not of earthly origin. This is the UFO hypothesis, which posits that the Battle of Los Angeles was one of the first major, documented encounters with an unidentified flying object in modern American history. Proponents of this view argue that the craft's characteristics, its silence, its slow hover, its resilience align perfectly with descriptions of extraterrestrial vehicles that would become commonplace in the decades to come. The subsequent government cover-up in this interpretation was not primarily about concealing an enemy incursion, but about preventing mass public hysteria. In the fragile psychological state of the nation so soon after Pearl Harbor, the military may have decided that admitting an encounter with a technology far beyond human comprehension would shatter civilian morale entirely. The swift dismissal of the event as a mistake, the contradictory statements from different branches of the military, and the suppression of further inquiry all fit the pattern of a classic UFO cover-up, an effort to bury a truth deemed too unsettling for the public to handle. The true story of the Battle of Los Angeles is likely lost to the fog of war and the passage of time, yet it stands as a powerful symbol of a nation grappling with fear and the unknown. It represents a moment when the official record collided head-on with the first-hand accounts of thousands of citizens, creating a historical rift that has never fully closed. Whether it was a case of tragic misidentification, a secret Japanese mission, or an early visit from another world, the event forces us to question how easily a single, unexplained incident can be explained away by authorities seeking to maintain control and calm. The searchlights that lit up the sky over LA that night did more than just scan for enemies. They illuminated the profound vulnerability of a nation at war and the enduring human desire to find answers, even when those answers point toward possibilities that defy everything we think we know. Every schoolchild in Britain learns the story of the gunpowder plot, the dark conspiracy by a band of Catholic radicals to blow up the Houses of Parliament during the state opening on November 5, 1605, obliterating King James I, his family, and the entire political establishment in one cataclysmic blast. The hero of the tale is the vigilant government that uncovered the plot just in time, leading to the dramatic capture of Guy Fawkes guarding 36 barrels of gunpowder in a cellar directly beneath the House of Lords. It is a foundational story of national salvation, a clear-cut narrative of good triumphing over evil. But what if this foundational story is built on a lie? What if the real conspiracy was not the one led by the desperate Catholic gentleman Robert Catesby, but a far more sophisticated and sinister operation masterminded by the king's own chief minister, Robert Cecil. This theory posits that the gunpowder plot was not a genuine threat that was foiled, but a classic false flag operation, carefully nurtured and manipulated to achieve specific political goals. The case for this interpretation begins with the curious ease with which the government infiltrated the conspiracy. The plot was not uncovered by accident. It was penetrated almost from its inception by a web of government spies. The most prominent of these was Robert Cecil's agent, a man named Robert Wintour, whose role was to report every detail of the plotter's movements back to his master. Even more tellingly, several of the conspirators themselves were deeply ambiguous figures. Francis Tresham, the man who famously sent the anonymous letter to his brother-in-law, Lord Monteagle, warning him to stay away from Parliament, is a prime suspect for being a government plant. The letter, which spoke of a terrible blow and advised Monteagle to devise some excuse to shift of your attendance, is often portrayed as a lucky break that saved the day. But to conspiracy theorists, it reads like a deliberate piece of stagecraft. Why send a vague, anonymous warning that would inevitably trigger a search of the building, unless the goal was not to prevent the explosion, but to ensure the plotters were caught in the act red-handed? Monteagle immediately took the letter to Cecil, and yet, despite this explicit warning of a catastrophic attack, the search of Parliament was delayed for days, allowing the plot to proceed to its final dramatic hour. This strange lethargy suggests the authorities were not rushing to prevent a disaster, but waiting for the perfect moment to spring their trap and maximize the public impact. The physical logistics of the plot also raise serious questions. The idea that a group of known Catholic recusants could rent a cellar directly beneath the House of Lords and spend weeks filling it with enormous quantities of gunpowder without attracting any suspicion stretches credulity. The Palace of Westminster was a bustling center of power with a constant flow of officials, servants, and guards. The gunpowder itself was not some easily concealed substance. It was a volatile, heavily regulated material, and transporting 36 barrels of it through the streets of London and into the heart of government would have been an operation of immense risk and visibility. The theory suggests that such an operation could only have succeeded with the tacit permission or even active assistance of someone in a position of high authority. The cellar's strange accessibility points toward a setup, a stage prepared for the plotters to walk onto, believing they were acting in secret, while all the while they were being carefully monitored. The ultimate proof of the conspiracy, for many, lies not in the plot's execution but in its consequences. The discovery of the gunpowder plot was a political godsend for Robert Cecil and King James. James, who had initially shown some tolerance towards his Catholic subjects in hopes of maintaining peace, was now provided with an irrefutable reason to clamp down with brutal force. The plot was used to justify a sweeping wave of anti-Catholic legislation that stripped Catholics of their remaining civil rights, barred them from professions, and subjected them to even harsher persecution. This crackdown was precisely what Cecil, a staunch Protestant, had long advocated. The plot served to demonize an entire community, unifying the Protestant majority behind the crown and solidifying James's sometimes shaky hold on the throne. It transformed Cecil from a powerful minister into the savior of the nation, his position unassailable. In this light, the gunpowder plot appears less like a genuine rebellion and more like a brilliantly orchestrated piece of political theater, a crisis manufactured to legitimize a pre-existing agenda of repression and consolidation of power. The image of Guy Fawkes, the villain caught in the cellar, was a necessary spectacle to frighten the nation into compliance, a symbol of a threat that may have been created by the very government that claimed to be protecting the people from it. While the alleged sabotage of the Lusitania involved a nation already at war, our next conspiracy takes us to the very brink of conflict, to an event that served as the primary spark for a war that would redefine America's role on the world stage. In the quiet of the evening on February 15, 1898, the American battleship USS Maine sat anchored in Havana Harbor, Cuba, a symbol of American power sent to protect U.S. interests during a violent uprising against Spanish colonial rule. At 9:40 that night, a cataclysmic explosion tore through the forward section of the ship. The massive vessel was ripped apart, sinking quickly into the murky water and taking 266 American sailors with her. The news ignited a firestorm of outrage back home. The rallying cry, "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain," swept across the nation, and within months the United States was at war with Spain, a conflict that would end with America acquiring a global empire, including Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. The official U.S. Naval Court of Inquiry, conducted under the pressures of a brewing war fever, concluded that the Maine had been destroyed by an external submarine mine, which then detonated one of the ship's forward magazines. This finding placed the blame squarely on Spain, either through direct action or negligent failure to protect a foreign vessel in its waters. For the American public and politicians eager for a fight, this was all the justification needed. The war was portrayed as a noble effort to liberate Cuba from Spanish tyranny, a narrative of righteous intervention. However, from the very beginning, this official story was met with skepticism. Spanish authorities vehemently denied any involvement and conducted their own investigation, which pointed to an internal accident. Many neutral international observers agreed, suggesting that the explosion's characteristics were inconsistent with an external mine. This fundamental disagreement over the very nature of the blast is the core of the conspiracy, suggesting that America may have marched to war based on a tragic misunderstanding or something far more sinister. The most plausible alternative explanation, and one supported by a U.S. Navy investigation conducted in the 1970s, points to a common danger in coal-powered battleships of that era: spontaneous combustion in coal bunkers. The Maine's coal bunkers were located adjacent to its powder magazines. If a fire smoldering in a coal bunker had reached a critical temperature, it could have easily ignited the munitions in the magazine next door, causing a catastrophic internal explosion. This theory is not without precedent. Several other naval vessels of the period suffered from similar, though less devastating, bunker fires. Proponents of this accident theory argue that the initial official inquiry, led by Captain William T. Sampson, was rushed and politically motivated, eager to find a cause that would satisfy the public demand for vengeance. The evidence they cite includes the way the hull plates were bent outward, which some experts argue is more consistent with an internal explosion forcing its way out than an external force blasting inward. This is where the conspiracy deepens, moving from a potential accident to a deliberate campaign of manipulation. The late 19th century was the golden age of yellow journalism, a fierce circulation war between newspaper magnates William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer. These men understood that sensationalism sold papers, and nothing sold better than war. They seized upon the tragedy of the Maine, publishing lurid and often entirely fabricated accounts of Spanish perfidy, depicting them as monstrous oppressors who had cold-bloodedly murdered American sailors. Hearst famously told his illustrator, who was in Cuba and reported that there seemed to be no war there, "You furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war." The newspapers did not just report the news, they actively shaped it, whipping the American public into a frenzy that made war politically unavoidable. In this view, the press, rather than any government official, was the primary conspirator, manufacturing a casus belli out of whole cloth for the sake of profit and power. But an even more provocative theory suggests that the yellow journalists were merely amplifying a plot that originated within the highest levels of the American government. This version posits that a cabal of ardent expansionists, including Assistant Secretary of the Navy Theodore Roosevelt, saw war with a weakened Spain as the perfect opportunity to fulfill America's manifest destiny beyond its continental borders and establish itself as a global naval power. According to this dark narrative, these men may have orchestrated the destruction of their own ship as a false flag operation. An agent could have been placed aboard to trigger an explosion in the magazine, ensuring a devastating loss of life that would guarantee public support for a war of aggression. While there is no direct evidence for such a plot, the actions of key figures are telling. Theodore Roosevelt, who had long advocated for war, famously called the sinking an act of dirty treachery, and in a revealing private letter, stated that he would give anything if President McKinley would order the fleet to Havana tomorrow. This Cuban business ought to stop. The Maine was sunk by an act of dirty treachery on the part of the Spaniards. His swift and absolute certainty before any investigation was complete has struck many historians as suspicious, suggesting a predetermined conclusion that served his expansionist ambitions. The legacy of the USS Maine is a haunting lesson in how public opinion can be marshaled for war. Whether the explosion was a terrible accident exploited by a sensationalist press or the result of a deliberate plot by expansionists within the government, the outcome was the same: a relatively short war that catapulted the United States into the ranks of imperial powers. The sinking of the Maine demonstrates that the line between tragedy and pretext is often drawn not by facts, but by those with the most to gain from the narrative of blame. It forces us to question whether the engines of war are ever driven by pure motives, or if they are always fueled by a complex mixture of chance, manipulation, and ambition, where the truth is often the first casualty. Leaving behind the terrestrial conspiracies of war and politics, we now aim our curiosity toward the silent, infinite expanse of space, to a single, tantalizing moment that has become the holy grail of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. On a quiet August evening in 1977, an unassuming radio telescope known as the Big Ear, operated by Ohio State University, was carrying out its routine survey of the sky. It was a volunteer-powered project, a labor of love in the quest to find a signal that could prove we are not alone in the universe. The system was automated, printing out long sheets of data that would later be analyzed by hand. For the most part, these printouts were filled with the expected background hiss of cosmic static and the occasional burst of known celestial phenomena. But on August 15th, the telescope recorded something entirely different, an anomaly so statistically significant and perfectly structured that when astronomer Jerry Amon reviewed the data a few days later, he was moved to circle the signal's alphanumeric code and scribble a single, powerful word in the margin: "Wow." What made this signal so extraordinary was its precise signature. It was a strong, narrowband radio signal concentrated on the specific frequency of 1420 MHz. This is a frequency that is naturally silent because it is protected by international agreement. It is a band where earthly transmitters are forbidden to broadcast, making it an ideal watering hole where an advanced civilization might attempt to make contact. The signal lasted for the full 72-second window that the Big Ear telescope could focus on a single point in the sky, rising to a peak intensity and then fading away exactly as would be expected from a celestial source moving with the rotation of the Earth. It came from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius, a region devoid of any known stars or planetary systems in our immediate cosmic neighborhood. All of these characteristics pointed to one breathtaking possibility. The WOW signal possessed all the hallmarks of an artificial transmission originating from beyond our solar system. The immediate and enduring conspiracy-adjacent theory is as straightforward as it is profound: that the WOW signal was a genuine, fleeting message from an extraterrestrial intelligence. Proponents of this idea argue that the combination of its frequency, strength, and behavior is so unlikely to occur naturally that the most logical explanation is an artificial source. The signal was a cosmic flashbulb, a momentary hello that passed by our planet before vanishing back into the eternal silence. The subsequent decades of silence from the same region of space, despite numerous attempts to detect a repeat signal, are explained by the signal's transient nature. Perhaps it was a one-time burst from an incredibly powerful astronomical event, like a directed energy beacon sweeping across the galaxy, and Earth just happened to be in its path for a mere 72 seconds. Or perhaps it was a targeted message that we simply failed to answer in time or in the correct way. This leads to the more shadowy layer of the conspiracy, which addresses the official scientific response. Why has there not been a massive, coordinated global effort to monitor that precise area of space with every available radio telescope? The theory suggests that the implications of the WOW signal were so monumental that they triggered a deliberate policy of quiet dismissal from governmental and scientific authorities. The potential for worldwide societal panic, the disruption of religious and philosophical foundations, and the geopolitical instability that could follow the confirmation of an advanced alien civilization are risks that any government would seek to manage. In this view, the signal was not ignored but was instead quietly classified, and the public narrative was steered toward more mundane explanations, like a comet or a secret military transmission, to avoid addressing the unsettling truth. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or SETI, has always operated on the fringes of mainstream science, perpetually underfunded and often mocked. Could this be because the powers that be already know that the cosmos is not silent, and they are simply not ready for the rest of humanity to know it too? Skeptics, of course, offer a range of natural explanations that attempt to demystify the event. Some have proposed that the signal was a reflection of a human transmission, bouncing off a piece of space debris. Others point to the possibility of a previously unknown astrophysical phenomenon that mimics an artificial signal. The most recent hypothesis suggests it could have been generated by a comet surrounded by a large hydrogen cloud, though this explanation has been heavily criticized and the specific comets were not in the right location at the time. The lack of a repeat detection remains the strongest argument against an extraterrestrial origin. A civilization trying to make contact would likely send a sustained or repeating signal. Yet, the mystery endures precisely because no prosaic explanation has ever fully accounted for all of the signal's unique characteristics. The WOW signal stands as a singular enigma, a one-off event that continues to whisper of possibilities that lie just beyond the edge of our understanding. It is a testament to the idea that in a universe of infinite possibilities, the most significant message might not be a lengthy discourse, but a single, brilliant, and unanswered exclamation point hanging in the void. But what if the very concept of a hoax is more complex than a simple lie? What if some of history's most famous frauds were not merely acts of greed, but sophisticated experiments in public psychology designed to shape what we believe is possible? This brings us to the bizarre and unsettling story of the Fiji mermaid and the man who turned deception into an art form, Phineas Taylor Barnum. In the 1840s, as the world was rapidly expanding through exploration and scientific discovery, Barnum's American Museum in New York City became a temple of the strange and marvelous. It was here that he unveiled one of his most notorious attractions, a grotesque specimen purportedly caught near the Fiji Islands. Audiences paid their admission to behold a creature with the wizened, grimacing head and torso of a monkey, crudely stitched to the desiccated tail of a fish. It was a jarring, almost monstrous creation, yet Barnum presented it with absolute conviction as a genuine zoological find, a missing link from the depths of the ocean. The conventional view is that this was a straightforward scam, a cynical ploy to separate the curious from their coins. But a more intriguing conspiracy suggests that Barnum's true genius lay not in the hoax itself, but in his understanding of the public's desire to believe. He operated on a philosophy he called humbug, which he defined not as an outright, malicious lie, but as a playful, provocative deception that ultimately left the audience entertained and, in a strange way, more intellectually engaged. The Fiji mermaid was never intended to withstand serious scientific scrutiny. In fact, its crude construction almost invited skepticism. The deeper conspiracy theory posits that Barnum and other showmen of his era were not just exploiting public gullibility, but were actively training it. By presenting an outlandish fake, they were creating a public spectacle that forced people to question, to debate, and to critically examine what was being presented to them. In an age before widespread literacy or standardized education, the museum was a primary source of knowledge for many. By blurring the lines between fact and fiction so blatantly, Barnum may have been performing a perverse public service, teaching the masses to be wary of authority and sensational claims. This leads to the more sinister interpretation of his work, that these hoaxes were a subtle form of social control. The 19th century was a time of immense social upheaval, with revolutionary scientific ideas like Darwin's theory of evolution threatening to upend religious and social hierarchies. What better way to manage the disruptive potential of genuine discovery than by flooding the public sphere with entertaining, absurd fakes? If a real fossil discovery could challenge the biblical creation story, a clearly fraudulent mermaid could make all strange new ideas seem equally ridiculous. By creating a culture of skepticism, the establishment could inoculate the public against accepting transformative truths too readily. The Fiji mermaid, in this light, becomes a tool of distraction and containment. It directs public curiosity towards safe, ultimately meaningless channels, ensuring that the revolutionary power of real science is diluted by a carnival atmosphere of doubt and amusement. People leave the museum not questioning the nature of life, but simply chuckling at how clever they were to spot the stitches. Barnum's methods reveal a profound understanding of mass psychology that feels eerily modern. He mastered the art of the publicity stunt, often planting letters in newspapers from outraged ministers or skeptical scientists, all to keep his attractions in the public conversation. He understood that controversy was more valuable than consensus, and that the very act of debating the mermaid's authenticity was more profitable than anyone simply accepting it as real. This manipulation of the media ecosystem prefigures the tactics of modern propaganda and public relations. The conspiracy, therefore, is not that one man fooled people with a monkey-fish hybrid. It is that he pioneered a system where the lines between entertainment, news, and fraud are permanently blurred, a system where the audience is made complicit in its own deception. We willingly participate in the humbug because the thrill of potentially uncovering the truth is more exciting than the truth itself. The legacy of P. T. Barnum and the Fiji mermaid is not just a funny story about an old hoax. It is a cautionary tale about a world where perception is engineered and where our desire for wonder can be harnessed to make us doubt everything, even the evidence right before our eyes. Leaving behind the silent mystery of the wow signal, we plunge into one of the most famous and enduring legends of the 20th century, a story that transformed a vast stretch of ocean into a synonym for the unknown. Our setting is December 5, 1945, a seemingly routine afternoon at the Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station in Florida. 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers, designated Flight 19, prepare for a standard navigation and bombing run training mission. Each aircraft is crewed by 3 men, a mix of experienced pilots and trainees totaling 14 aviators. The flight is led by a seasoned instructor, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, who has over 2,500 hours of flight time, though he was reportedly feeling unwell and had even attempted to have someone replace him that day. The weather is fair, the planes are fully fueled, and the exercise is considered a milk run, a simple overwater hop to a practice range and back. At 2:10 in the afternoon, the powerful engines of the Avengers roar to life, and the 5 bombers lumber down the runway and climb into the clear afternoon sky, headed east over the Atlantic. None of them would ever be seen again. The first signs of trouble emerged about 90 minutes into the mission. Radio transmissions intercepted by the base and other aircraft began to reveal a growing crisis. Lieutenant Taylor's voice crackled over the airwaves, reporting that his compasses were malfunctioning. He claimed they seemed to be going haywire, leaving him unable to determine his direction. "Both my compasses are out," he stated, "and I'm trying to find Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I'm over land, but it's broken. I'm sure I'm in the Keys, but I don't know how far down." This was the first critical error. If his compasses had failed, Taylor was likely relying on dead reckoning and visual cues, but he was almost certainly not over the Florida Keys. He was probably still well east of the Florida coast. His disorientation was complete. For the next several hours, a haunting series of radio exchanges documented the flight's descent into chaos. The pilots argued about their position, with Taylor insisting they fly northeast, a course that would have taken them deeper into the open Atlantic, while others in the flight correctly suggested heading west, which should have eventually brought them to the mainland. As dusk fell, the situation grew increasingly dire. The weather, which had been calm at their departure, was deteriorating rapidly, with high winds and rough seas building below. The last clear transmission from Lieutenant Taylor was heard at 6:20 p.m. "All planes close up tight. We'll have to ditch unless landfall. When the first plane drops below 10 gallons, we all go down together." The implication was heartbreaking. The flight was lost, low on fuel, and preparing to ditch their heavy bombers in the stormy, pitch-black ocean, a maneuver with little chance of success, especially at night. A massive land, air, and sea rescue operation was immediately launched, adding an almost surreal layer of tragedy to the night. One of the rescue aircraft, a PBM Mariner flying boat with a 13-man crew specifically designed for overwater search and rescue, also vanished without a trace after reporting its position. A tanker ship in the area reported seeing a massive fireball in the sky at the exact time and location the Mariner would have been, suggesting it had suffered a catastrophic mid-air explosion, a known risk for the aircraft which had a reputation for fuel vapor leaks. The official Navy investigation ultimately placed the blame on Lieutenant Taylor's navigational errors, concluding that he led his flight hopelessly off course until they ran out of fuel and ditched in the immense, unforgiving sea. Yet, the sheer totality of the loss, 5 large aircraft and 27 experienced men, vanishing without a single piece of wreckage ever being conclusively found, refused to be explained away by simple pilot error. This vacuum of certainty became the fertile ground upon which the modern legend of the Bermuda Triangle was built. The incident became the cornerstone, the quintessential case that seemed to defy all logical explanation. Conspiracy theorists pointed to the strange radio reports of compass failure as evidence of something far more sinister than human mistake. They proposed the existence of an electronic fog, a mysterious atmospheric phenomenon that could disorient pilots and disable instrumentation, effectively trapping them in a cloud of confusion from which there was no escape. Others looked to the skies, suggesting that Flight 19 had not crashed but had been abducted by a UFO, its men and machines taken for purposes beyond our understanding. The most fantastical theory ventured into the realm of theoretical physics, proposing that the Avengers had flown through a temporary rift in the fabric of space-time, a vortex that instantaneously transported them to another time or dimension. Proponents of this idea ask a provocative question. If the planes had simply crashed, why was no debris ever found? The official response points to the extreme depth of the Atlantic in that area and the powerful Gulf Stream current, which could have scattered lightweight debris over hundreds of miles in a matter of days. But for those who believe, the lack of physical evidence is itself the most compelling evidence for a paranormal event. The story of Flight 19 was masterfully amplified by authors like Charles Berlitz in the 1970s, who selectively presented the facts, exaggerated the mystery, and bundled this single tragedy with other unrelated maritime and aerial disappearances to create the illusion of a persistent, localized danger. They downplayed the fact that the area now known as the Bermuda Triangle sees no more shipping or air traffic losses proportionally than any other heavily trafficked stretch of ocean. The true conspiracy, therefore, may not be a supernatural force, but the very creation of the myth itself, the transformation of a tragic but explicable accident into a global phenomenon that taps into our deepest fears of the unknown. The disappearance of Flight 19 serves as a powerful lesson in how a compelling narrative, fueled by grief and a desire for answers more exciting than human fallibility, can eclipse a simpler, sadder truth, forever branding a section of the map with an aura of mystery it may never truly deserve. Our journey now takes us from the physical mysteries of the ocean and sky into the darkest corners of human ideology, to a conspiracy built not on a hidden truth, but on a meticulously crafted and profoundly dangerous lie. This is the story of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a document that stands as one of the most evil and influential forgeries ever created. Unlike the other conspiracies we have explored, the question here is not what happened, but why such a malicious fiction was manufactured and how it was able to poison global politics for over a century. The conspiracy is not the fictional Jewish plot described in its pages, but the real, deliberate conspiracy by powerful forces to invent that plot for their own sinister purposes. The protocols first surfaced in Russia in the early 1900s, a time of immense social upheaval. Tsar Nicholas II was struggling to maintain his autocratic rule against a rising tide of revolution, and his regime was desperate for a scapegoat to divert public anger away from its own failings. The document, which claimed to be the secret minutes from a meeting of Jewish leaders plotting to control the world through control of the banks, the media, and political institutions, provided the perfect tool. Historians have extensively traced its origins to a ploy by the Tsar's secret police, the Okhrana. The text was largely plagiarized from a French political satire by Maurice Joly that criticized Napoleon III, with the fictional monarch replaced by a shadowy cabal of Jews. Another source was a German novel, making the entire document a patchwork of stolen fiction, cynically repurposed to incite hatred. It was a classic tactic of authoritarian rule: create a common enemy to unite a fractured population, and in doing so, consolidate your own power. The forgery was so transparent that a thorough investigation by the Times of London in 1921 exposed it as a fraud, but by then the damage was irreversible. The power of the lie was not in its originality, but in its ruthless dissemination. The protocols were translated into dozens of languages and spread across Europe and the Americas, finding a receptive audience among those predisposed to bigotry or fearful of modern societal changes. Its most catastrophic adoption, however, came in Nazi Germany. Adolf Hitler cited the protocols explicitly in his book Mein Kampf, using it as a core justification for his anti-Semitic policies. He declared that the forgery's fictional plot was real, and that if the Jews were not stopped, the horrific future it described would come to pass. The Nazi propaganda machine, led by Joseph Goebbels, printed and distributed millions of copies, making the document a central pillar of the ideology that would lead to the Holocaust. The conspiracy to create a lie had successfully fueled a genocide, demonstrating with terrifying clarity how a weaponized fiction can mobilize masses toward unimaginable horror. What is perhaps most alarming is the document's enduring legacy long after its fraudulent nature was universally exposed by scholars and courts. It remains a cornerstone of anti-Semitic propaganda to this day, circulated by neo-Nazi groups, certain extremist ideologies, and even promoted by state-controlled media in some nations. Its resilience reveals a profound and unsettling truth about the nature of disinformation. For those who want to believe, no amount of evidence to the contrary matters. The protocols provide a simple, all-encompassing explanation for complex world events, placing the blame for everything from economic downturns to political instability on a single, malevolent group. This taps into a deep-seated human need for order and a villain to blame, a need that is often stronger than the appeal of factual reality. The true conspiracy of the protocols of the Elders of Zion, therefore, is a masterclass in the weaponization of narrative. It shows us that a lie, repeated often enough and spread widely enough, can take on a life of its own, becoming more powerful than the truth. It is a chilling reminder that the most dangerous historical mysteries are not those about lost treasures or ancient civilizations, but those about the human capacity for hatred and the cynical manipulation of fear. This particular forgery serves as a permanent warning about the fragility of truth in the face of organized malice, a lesson that remains critically relevant in our own era of information warfare and viral disinformation. But what if a secret was so potent that its keeper had to be permanently silenced, not in a shadowy alleyway, but on a sun-drenched beach in plain sight? This brings us to a mystery so meticulously bizarre it feels like a page torn from a spy novelist's notebook, a case where every clue seems to point in a different direction, ensuring the truth remains forever out of reach. On the 1st of December 1948, on Somerton Beach in Adelaide, Australia, a well-dressed man was found propped against a seawall, seemingly asleep. He was in impeccable physical condition, dressed in a suit and tie with shiny shoes. There was no sign of violence, no wallet, and no identification. The labels had been carefully removed from all his clothing, a detail that immediately signaled this was no ordinary death. A subsequent autopsy revealed a shocking fact. This healthy man had died from heart failure, but pathologists could find no natural cause. His symptoms were consistent with a fast-acting, undetectable poison, yet no trace of any toxin was ever found in his system. He was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost who had simply decided to stop living. The mystery deepened exponentially months later when a hidden fob pocket sewn into the man's trousers yielded a tiny, tightly rolled scrap of paper. On it were printed just two words, Taman Shud. This Persian phrase, meaning ended or finished, was instantly recognizable to investigators as the final line from the 12th century poetry collection, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. In a stunning piece of detective work, the police managed to link the scrap to a specific, rare edition of the book, which had been discovered discarded in the back seat of an unlocked car not far from the beach. Inside the back cover of that very book, detectives made an even more tantalizing discovery, a faintly penciled sequence of letters that appeared to be a secret code. Alongside this code was an unlisted telephone number. This series of finds transformed the case from a simple death investigation into a labyrinth of international intrigue. The code, a string of letters that read like a random jumble, has never been conclusively deciphered by military intelligence or amateur cryptographers despite decades of effort. This has led to the most compelling conspiracy theory that the Somerton man was a Cold War spy, likely poisoned by his own handlers after a mission went awry. Australia in the late 1940s was a hotbed of espionage activity, with both Western and Soviet agencies vying for influence. The use of a poison that leaves no trace, the meticulous removal of all identifying marks, and the eerie Taman Shud note, a classic spy's signal that an operation or a life was terminated, all fit the profile of a professional intelligence liquidation. The code in the book could have been a one-time cipher for a dead drop, and the man's presence in Adelaide, a city with sensitive weapons research facilities, adds further weight to this theory. He was a player in a hidden war, and his death was a necessary, clean conclusion to his part in the game. Yet, for every piece of evidence pointing to espionage, there is another that suggests a story rooted in tragic personal emotion. The unlisted phone number traced back to a former nurse named Jessica Thompson, who lived just a few hundred meters from where the body was found. When shown a plaster cast of the dead man's face, she reacted with visible shock, though she consistently denied knowing who he was. Intriguingly, Jessica Thompson's own daughter later revealed that her mother had known the man and had owned a copy of the Rubaiyat, the very same edition linked to the case. This opens the door to a theory of a doomed romance. Was the Somerton man a former lover, perhaps an ex-soldier from her past, who had come to Adelaide to rekindle their relationship? Did Taman Shud signify the end of their affair? Could his death have been a suicide motivated by heartbreak, using a rare plant-based toxin that dissipated from the body? The personal connection is undeniable, yet it fails to fully explain the extreme measures taken to conceal his identity or the existence of the unbreakable code. The case takes yet another turn with a potential identity. In recent years, investigators using DNA and genealogical research have pointed to a man named Carl Webb, an electrical engineer from Melbourne. Proponents of this theory suggest Webb may have been a jilted husband who traveled to Adelaide after his wife left him, possibly for another man connected to Jessica Thomson. This would neatly fuse the spy and romance theories. A man with technical skills could have been involved in sensitive work while his personal life was in utter turmoil. His death might have been an elaborate suicide designed to frame a rival or send a cryptic message, or it could have been a murder made to look like a poisoning. The problem is that even with a potential name, the core mystery remains. The code is still unbroken, the reason for the meticulous identification is still unknown, and the true cause of death is still a medical impossibility. The Taman Shud case endures not because it lacks clues, but because it has too many, each one leading down a different path into the shadows of the Cold War, the complexities of the human heart, and the silent efficiency of a perfect, unsolvable crime. Our journey now moves from physical artifacts and political plots into the realm of pure information, to a theory that suggests the greatest story ever told might also be the most intricate puzzle ever devised. This is the mystery of the Bible code, the controversial idea that hidden within the original Hebrew text of the Old Testament are precise predictions of future events, encoded through a system of equidistant letter sequences. The concept is deceptively simple. If you take the text as a continuous string of letters without spaces or punctuation, and select letters at a fixed interval, for example, every 50th letter, those letters can sometimes form words or even coherent phrases that seem to describe people and events thousands of years after the text was written. Proponents claim this is not a coincidence, but a deliberate encryption, a divine signature woven into the very fabric of Scripture. The modern popularization of this idea exploded in the 1990s with the work of journalists like Michael Drosnin, whose book presented startling apparent predictions. The most famous example involves the assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Drosnin and other researchers claimed that by applying this skip code method to the Book of Deuteronomy, they found Rabin's full name intersecting with the phrase, "assassin that will assassinate," and that this code was discovered a year before the tragic event actually occurred in 1995. Other purported discoveries included the names of world leaders like Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, encoded near references to war, and even modern inventions like airplane and computer appearing in texts composed over 2 millennia ago. These findings were often bolstered by the use of computer algorithms, which could rapidly search through the hundreds of thousands of letters in the Torah for any meaningful patterns, giving the endeavor a veneer of scientific rigor. This leads directly to the most profound and conspiratorial question. If the code is real, who could possibly be the author? For many believers, the answer is straightforward and miraculous. The encoder is God. This theory posits that the Bible is not merely a text inspired by a divine being, but a complex information matrix, a message engineered with a level of foresight and mathematical precision that is simply impossible for a human author. It would be a definitive proof of the supernatural, demonstrating that the universe itself is governed by a conscious intelligence that embedded a roadmap of history within its sacred text. A more speculative, alternative theory suggests the knowledge could have come from an advanced, perhaps even extraterrestrial, civilization that imparted this sophisticated mathematical language to ancient scribes. In this scenario, the Bible becomes a sort of time capsule or a vessel for advanced information, its true purpose only becoming decipherable with the advent of modern computing technology. However, the skeptical viewpoint, championed by mathematicians and statisticians, offers a much different explanation rooted in the quirks of human perception. They argue that the Bible code is a textbook example of apophenia, the innate human tendency to perceive meaningful patterns or connections in random or meaningless data. Our brains are hardwired for pattern recognition. It's what allows us to see shapes in clouds or faces in the bark of a tree. When you have a massive text like the Torah, which contains over 300,000 letters, and you allow a computer to search through it with flexible parameters jumping different skip lengths, starting from different points and allowing for slight misspellings, the probability of finding some seemingly meaningful word combinations by sheer chance becomes incredibly high. Statisticians like Brendan McKay have demonstrated this by applying the same code-finding techniques to other large texts, such as Herman Melville's Moby Dick, and successfully predicting the assassinations of famous figures and other historical events with similar ease. The apparent prophecy, they argue, is an illusion created by the sheer scale of the data and our willingness to ignore the countless nonsensical combinations that are also generated. The debate over the Bible code ultimately forces us to confront deeper questions about the nature of information, prophecy, and the sacred. Is a prediction encoded after the fact still a prophecy? Does finding a pattern give it meaning, or are we imposing meaning upon it? The theory challenges our understanding of what a sacred text can be, pushing it beyond a narrative of faith and morality and into the realm of a cryptographic time bomb, waiting for the right key to unlock its secrets. Whether viewed as a profound divine mystery or a fascinating psychological phenomenon, the Bible code remains a powerful testament to humanity's enduring desire to find order and hidden meaning in the universe, and to the compelling allure of believing that the answers to our future have been lying in plain sight in the ancient words of a book all along. Yet even the brightest star can be extinguished in a moment of darkness, and the sudden death of Marilyn Monroe in the summer of 1962 sent shockwaves around the globe. The official story was tragically simple. The 36-year-old movie icon was found dead in the bedroom of her Brentwood home, an empty bottle of sleeping pills nearby. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office ruled her death a probable suicide, the result of an acute barbiturate overdose. To a public that knew only her luminous smile and bubbly screen persona, it was a heartbreaking conclusion, the final act of a troubled starlet who could no longer bear the weight of her own fame. But almost from the moment the news broke, this straightforward narrative was met with deep and abiding suspicion. The circumstances surrounding her death were so filled with oddities, inconsistencies, and unanswered questions that they gave rise to one of the most persistent conspiracy theories of the 20th century. A theory that suggests Marilyn Monroe was not a victim of her own despair, but of a cold-blooded murder designed to protect the most powerful men in America. At the heart of this conspiracy lies the explosive question of motive, and it points directly to the highest echelons of political power. By 1962, Marilyn's life was intimately intertwined with President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. She had reportedly been involved in affairs with both men, moving from a glamorous dalliance with the president to a more intense and perhaps emotionally fraught relationship with his brother. This placed her in a uniquely dangerous position. She was a confidante to secrets that could have destroyed the Kennedy presidency and the Democratic Party. The theory posits that Marilyn knew too much not just about the affairs, but about serious matters of state. Rumors swirled of a little red book, a diary in which she meticulously recorded details of her conversations with the brothers, including sensitive information about Cuba, the mafia, and even covert CIA operations. In the paranoid climate of the Cold War, an unstable Hollywood actress with access to such information was seen as a catastrophic liability. The motive for murder then becomes clear, silencing a potential whistleblower to prevent a political apocalypse. The crime scene itself is a catalogue of inconsistencies that fuels this theory. The timeline of that August 4th is notoriously murky. Marilyn's housekeeper, Eunice Murray, gave conflicting accounts of when she discovered the body, initially claiming she saw a light under Marilyn's door and then later changing her story. The phone records from that night are another major point of contention. It is alleged that several calls were made from Marilyn's home after the time she was supposedly already dead, including one to the president's brother. Even more puzzling is the condition of the bedroom. Despite the official cause of death being an oral overdose of dozens of pills, there was no glass of water found near the bed to help swallow them, and no evidence of the cramping or vomiting that typically accompanies such a massive ingestion of barbiturates. The absence of these telltale signs has led forensic experts to suggest that the drugs may have been administered another way, possibly through an injection, which would point directly to foul play. This leads to the most sinister layer of the conspiracy: who exactly carried out the killing. The involvement of Robert Kennedy is a central pillar of the theory. Critics point out that he was in Northern California on the day Marilyn died, but some witnesses placed him in Los Angeles that afternoon, allegedly visiting her home for a tense confrontation. Did he go there to end their relationship, and did that confrontation turn deadly, or was his presence part of a wider, more organized plot? This is where the theory expands to include other powerful forces. The Kennedys, through their father's connections, had a complicated history with organized crime. Simultaneously, the Attorney General was waging a very public war against the mafia. If Marilyn had knowledge that could link the Kennedy brothers to the mob, she would have been a target for both the government and the underworld. Some versions of the conspiracy suggest a collaboration between rogue CIA agents and mafia figures to eliminate the problem. A clean, untraceable operation made to look like a suicide. The swift removal of evidence and the closure of the case by authorities sympathetic to the Kennedys would have ensured that the truth never saw the light of day. The official inquest into Marilyn Monroe's death was notoriously limited and flawed. Key witnesses were never called, evidence was lost or mishandled, and the case was closed with remarkable speed. For believers in the conspiracy, this is the final, damning piece of the puzzle. A cover-up orchestrated from the very top. The quintessential Hollywood mystery is therefore not just about the death of a movie star. It is a story about the collision of fame, power, and politics. It forces us to ask whether the bright lights of stardom can ever truly compete with the dark secrets of Washington, and if the pursuit of power can justify the silencing of a human voice. Marilyn's death remains an open wound in the American psyche because it represents the ultimate fear that the truth is not always what the official report says it is, and that sometimes the most captivating stories are the ones that are never allowed to be told. But what if the most terrifying aspect of the Jack the Ripper case wasn't the mystery of the killer's identity, but the chilling possibility that it was never a mystery to those in power at all? The Autumn of Terror in 1888, with its 5 canonical murders of women in London's impoverished Whitechapel district, has spawned countless theories about the killer's name. Yet, the most enduring conspiracy shifts the focus from the shadowy alleys to the corridors of power, proposing that Scotland Yard and the British establishment did not fail to catch Jack the Ripper, they actively chose not to. This theory posits that the killer was a man of such high social standing that his exposure would have triggered a scandal capable of shaking the monarchy itself, leading to a deliberate, systemic cover-up to protect the realm from disgrace. The fuel for this fire is the intriguing list of suspects who are not the usual denizens of the East End, but men from the pinnacle of Victorian society. One of the most prominent figures is Prince Albert Victor, the Duke of Clarence, grandson of Queen Victoria and the direct heir to the throne after his father. The prince was known to have a fragile constitution and was rumored to have led a less than discreet private life, possibly involving visits to the brothels of Whitechapel. The conspiracy suggests that Albert Victor contracted syphilis, which, in its advanced stages, could have induced the homicidal madness behind the murders. The idea of the future king being a brutal serial killer was, of course, unthinkable to the government. According to this narrative, high-ranking officials, including the Prime Minister, discovered the truth and orchestrated a massive diversion. The prince was then quietly sent away. Some versions of the theory say he was even secretly institutionalized or euthanized, while the police investigation was deliberately bungled and obfuscated to lead the public and the press on a wild goose chase. A related and equally compelling suspect is Sir William Gull, a distinguished physician who was actually Queen Victoria's personal doctor. Gull was a man of immense respectability, but he was also a high-level Freemason. This connection forms the backbone of an even more intricate conspiracy, one that involves not just an individual cover-up, but an institutional one by the secretive Masonic Brotherhood. The theory often intertwines with the royal narrative, suggesting that Gull was not the killer, but the man tasked with silencing the killer's victims. The story goes that Prince Albert Victor had secretly married a Catholic shopgirl named Annie Crook, and the other victims, like Mary Jane Kelly, were prostitutes who knew of this marriage and posed a threat to the Protestant succession. To protect the monarchy, a shadowy group of Masons, led by Gull and possibly involving the painter Walter Sickert as a lookout, systematically eliminated these women. The gruesome, ritualistic nature of the murders, the removal of organs, the specific mutilations, are interpreted by proponents as Masonic symbols, a secret signature left by the conspirators as a warning to others. The evidence for these high society theories is, by its nature, circumstantial and anecdotal, which is precisely what makes the conspiracy so resilient. Critics point out that Prince Albert Victor had a well-documented alibi for at least one of the murder nights, being far from London. They also note that Sir William Gull was 69 years old at the time and had suffered a serious stroke, making it highly unlikely he could have physically carried out the attacks and evaded capture in the labyrinthine streets of Whitechapel. Mainstream historians dismiss the Masonic angle as a classic anti-establishment trope, projecting modern suspicions about secret societies onto a historical event. They argue that the police investigation, while flawed, was not sinisterly incompetent. It was simply overwhelmed by the unprecedented nature of the crimes, the limitations of forensic science, and the chaotic, densely populated environment in which they occurred. Yet, the cover-up theory endures because it offers a more satisfying explanation for the ultimate failure of the world's most famous police force. The idea that a handful of bobbies were simply outwitted by a cunning local man feels inadequate for crimes of such notoriety. The notion of a grand conspiracy, however, provides a reason for the dead ends, the lost evidence, and the strange reticence of some officials. It transforms the story from a straightforward whodunit into a profound commentary on class and power in Victorian England. It suggests that the lives of 5 impoverished women were deemed expendable by the state, sacrificed to protect the reputation of an institution and maintain the social order. The true horror of Jack the Ripper in this light is not the man with the knife, but the cold, calculating machinery of power that decided some secrets were too dangerous to ever be revealed, ensuring that the blood-stained mystery of Whitechapel would forever remain a testament to the lengths to which an empire would go to protect itself from the truth. Now we shift our focus from the shadowy figures of history to the stark, modern architecture of the American West, where a conspiracy theory is painted in bold, unnerving colors for every traveler to see. Nestled on the plains of Colorado, the Denver International Airport is not just a transportation hub. It is a sprawling complex that has become a magnet for modern doomsday prophecies. From the moment it opened in 1995, the airport seemed to cultivate an aura of mystery. Its construction was plagued by massive cost overruns and multi-year delays, immediately sparking rumors about what could possibly be taking so long and costing so much money if it was truly just an airport. But the true heart of the mystery lies not in the runways, but inside the main terminal, where a series of massive, apocalyptic murals greet visitors with a vision of violence and despair that feels utterly disconnected from the hopeful spirit of travel. The most infamous mural, painted by artist Leo Tanguma, is titled "In Peace and Harmony with Nature," but its imagery is anything but peaceful. The sprawling painting is divided into two sections. One side depicts a grim scene of environmental collapse and human suffering. A city burns in the background, a dead girl lies cradled by soldiers in gas masks, and animals and children are shown slain. The central figure is a gigantic, menacing soldier holding a rifle in one hand and a menacing blade in the other, his face hidden by a gas mask that evokes images of chemical warfare. The other side of the mural offers a contrasting vision of children from every culture, surrounded by vibrant animals, seemingly working to rebuild a pristine world. To the casual observer, it might be interpreted as a stark warning about the path of destruction versus the path of conservation. But for conspiracy theorists, the message is far more literal and sinister. They see it not as a warning, but as a blueprint, a depiction of a planned global catastrophe that will wipe out a significant portion of humanity, leaving a cleansed world for the survivors to inherit. This unsettling artwork is just one piece of a much larger puzzle that fuels the airport's dark reputation. The official explanation that these are merely provocative pieces of art meant to inspire thought is dismissed by theorists as a flimsy cover story. They point to other bizarre features scattered throughout the facility, such as a statue of a giant, red-eyed, demonic blue Mustang titled Lucifer that famously killed its creator, and a cryptic stone slab in the main terminal that bears a Masonic symbol and a strange inscription about a New World Airport Commission, a group that has no public record of existence. These elements are woven together to form a compelling narrative that the Denver airport is not primarily an airport at all, but a front for a massive underground city or bunker complex designed to shelter the global elite during a coming cataclysm. The immense size of the airport, its location far from the city center, and the persistent rumors of vast, off-limits subterranean levels all feed into the idea that it is a headquarters for the so-called New World Order. The theories often branch into two distinct but related directions. The first is that the facility is a military-style command and control center, a place where influential figures could ride out a nuclear war, a pandemic, or a social uprising. The second, more extreme theory suggests it serves a more horrifying purpose, a containment facility, perhaps for victims of a manufactured plague or even for the elites themselves, who might be hiding from an angered populace or a cosmic event. The recurring Masonic and alleged Illuminati symbolism found in the airport's architectural details is interpreted as a secret language, a sign that this is a project of a hidden global cabal that operates above the laws of nations. The apocalyptic murals in this context are not just art, they are a boast, a declaration of intent, or even a form of predictive programming, subtly preparing the public for a grim future that the powers that be have already planned. The Denver Airport Conspiracy stands as a uniquely modern phenomenon, a myth built not on ancient texts or dusty archives, but on the very public art and architecture of an everyday place, transforming a routine layover into a glimpse of a terrifying and hidden world. From the intricate web of social and political conspiracies, we now turn our gaze upward to a cataclysm that arrived without warning from the sky, an event so immense and mysterious it has fueled scientific debate and wild speculation for over a century. On the morning of June 30th, 1908, in a remote, largely uninhabited region of central Siberia known as Tunguska, the sky was torn apart. Witnesses reported seeing a column of blinding blue light, nearly as bright as the sun, moving rapidly across the heavens. This was followed by a flash and a series of thunderous shocks that knocked people off their feet hundreds of miles away. The sound of the explosion was heard over 1,000 kilometers distant, and the resulting shockwave registered on barometric sensors as far away as England. It was an impact of apocalyptic proportions, yet it left no crater. When scientific expeditions finally reached the site years later, they were met with a scene of unimaginable devastation. 80 million trees had been flattened in a radial pattern over an area of 800 square miles, all pointing away from the epicenter as if a giant hand had smashed them down. At the center of this destruction, a few skeletal trees remained standing, stripped bare of their branches and bark. The official and most widely accepted scientific explanation is that a large meteoroid or a fragment of a comet, roughly 100 to 200 feet in diameter, entered the Earth's atmosphere at tens of thousands of miles per hour. The immense friction and pressure caused it to explode in a massive airburst several miles above the ground, releasing energy equivalent to 10 to 15 million tons of TNT, 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The lack of a crater is consistent with such an event. The object vaporized completely in the searing heat of the explosion, its cosmic dust scattering across the globe. Yet, the sheer power of the event and its remote location created a perfect vacuum for alternative theories to flourish. The first major scientific expedition didn't reach Tunguska until 1927, nearly 2 decades after the explosion. This long delay, caused by the extreme remoteness of the region and the immense political upheaval of the Russian Revolution and subsequent civil war, meant that crucial evidence was lost to time. This absence of immediate, on-the-ground scrutiny has allowed for more exotic explanations to take root, the most compelling of which centers on one of history's most brilliant and enigmatic inventors, Nikola Tesla. Just months before the Tunguska event, Tesla was actively promoting his groundbreaking work on the wireless transmission of electrical energy. He claimed to have developed a technology that could send vast amounts of power through the atmosphere to any point on the globe. Proponents of this theory suggest that Tesla was conducting a test of his directed energy, or particle beam, weapon from his Wardenclyffe laboratory on Long Island, aiming for a remote and uninhabited area to demonstrate its power. According to this narrative, the calculation went horribly wrong, and the immense burst of energy was accidentally focused on the Tunguska region, causing the catastrophic explosion. Supporters point to reports that Tesla had requested detailed maps of Siberia around that time, and that he himself later expressed concerns about the destructive potential of his inventions. While there is no direct evidence to support this, the theory persists because it connects the event to a known technological genius whose work seemed, to many, like magic. Another popular theory ventures even further into the realm of science fiction, proposing that the explosion was not natural or human-made, but extraterrestrial in origin. This hypothesis suggests that an alien spacecraft, suffering a catastrophic engine failure or perhaps involved in some kind of battle, exploded high above the Siberian taiga. The intense light and the massive, non-impact explosion are seen as consistent with the detonation of a matter-antimatter reactor, or a similar advanced propulsion system far beyond our understanding. The remote location is interpreted not as a coincidence, but as evidence that the craft was attempting to avoid populated areas before its demise. A related, though even more speculative, idea posits that the object was not a spaceship, but a tiny, primordial black hole passing through the Earth. In this scenario, the black hole, with the mass of a large asteroid but compressed into a space smaller than an atom, would have entered the atmosphere, generated a shockwave as it passed through, and exited out the other side of the planet, leaving behind the devastation at Tunguska but no material residue. While physicists generally dismiss this due to the lack of a corresponding exit event elsewhere on Earth, the theory highlights the lengths to which researchers have gone to explain an event that seems to defy conventional understanding. The enduring fascination with Tunguska is not just about the explosion itself, but about what it represents: a moment where the known laws of physics and the official narratives of science were challenged by an event of almost incomprehensible power. The official explanation of a meteoroid airburst is the most scientifically sound, supported by computer models and our understanding of similar, though smaller, events that have occurred since. Yet the conspiracy theories surrounding Tesla, alien spacecraft, and black holes endure because they speak to a deeper human desire. They transform a random act of nature into a story with intention, whether it be human ambition, extraterrestrial visitation, or an encounter with the most exotic objects in the cosmos. The Tunguska event remains a powerful reminder of our planet's vulnerability to forces from beyond our atmosphere, and a testament to the fact that when the official story has gaps, the human imagination will always rush in to fill them with possibilities that are, in their own way, as awe-inspiring as the truth. And so our journey through the corridors of shadowed history comes to a close. From the windswept plains of China, where a lost Roman legion may have found a new home, to the frozen slopes of the Ural Mountains where 9 hikers met an inexplicable fate. From the blood-soaked basement of the Ipatiev house to the sun-drenched mystery of Somerton Beach, we have ventured into the gaps left by the official record. We have questioned the stories we were told, peered behind the curtain of accepted narratives, and considered the possibilities that lie whispering in the margins of our history books. This has been a tour of history's greatest what-ifs, a collection of enigmas that refuse to be neatly filed away and forgotten. The true value of these conspiracies lies not in their likelihood of being true, but in the powerful questions they force us to ask. For every compelling theory about the lost colony of Roanoke or the suspicious death of Marilyn Monroe, there is almost always a more mundane, evidence-based explanation. Most of these tales are almost certainly not true in the literal sense, yet to dismiss them outright is to miss their profound significance. These stories are the antibodies of history, emerging to challenge a narrative that feels too clean, too convenient, or incomplete. They flourish wherever there are unexplained anomalies, where the official account feels unsatisfying, or where those in power had a clear motive to obscure the truth. They remind us that history is not a fixed set of facts, but a constant process of interpretation and reinterpretation, often shaped by the victors who get to tell the tale. Ultimately, these mysteries hold up a mirror to our own minds. Our powerful desire to find patterns, to connect dots, and to see intention in chaos is what gives rise to the Dyatlov Pass theories and the curse of Tecumseh. Our innate skepticism of authority fuels the suspicions surrounding the Lusitania and the Philadelphia experiment. Our yearning for hope and redemption allows the legend of Anastasia to endure even in the face of DNA evidence. These conspiracies are not just about the past, they are about us, about our relationship with truth, power, and the unknown. They demonstrate that history is as much a story about human psychology as it is about dates and events. The investigation is never truly over. New evidence can emerge. Technologies like DNA analysis can rewrite a century-old mystery, and a fresh perspective can suddenly make the impossible seem plausible. History is a living thing, and our understanding of it is always evolving. The conversation we've started here is just the beginning. Now we want to hear from you. Which of these 30 conspiracies lingers in your mind? Does the evidence for a deeper plot in Abraham Lincoln's assassination feel overwhelming? Or are you convinced that the strange case of the Somerton Man was a tragic romance rather than a Cold War spy thriller? Let us know in the comments below which theory you find most compelling and why. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into history's greatest mysteries, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We have many more journeys into the shadows planned, where we'll continue to separate fact from folklore and explore the stories that challenge everything we think we know. Until then,